You're giving Stephanie a break.
Please join me in actually call the October 29th, 2012 San Carlos Planning Commission meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to note that Angela Harper Pedersen is with us via telephone. Her location has been advertised. She will participate in the meeting. Any votes you take, I need to do a roll call vote.
Can we just check that she's here? Angela, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Loud and clear.
Thank you.
Perfect.
All right.
All right.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Present.
Commissioner Silberman,
Present.
Commissioner Corral,
Present.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Present.
Chair Marsters.
Present. Public comment. Public comment is limited to items not on the agenda. The Commission may briefly respond to statements made or questions posed as allowed by the Brown Act. However, the Commission's general policy is to refer items to staff for attention or to have a matter placed on a future Commission's agenda for a more comprehensive action or report. Is there anyone here who would like to speak under public comment? Seeing none, we will move on to approval of the minutes.
I have no changes to the minutes.
Either do I.
I do not either.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen, do you have any changes to the minutes?
I do not.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Do you have to roll call?
Aye.
Roll call, yes.
Yeah, I guess we have to do
Commissioner
a roll call.
Gutierrez,
Aye.
Commissioner Silberman,
Aye.
Commissioner Corral,
Aye.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Aye.
Chair Marsters.
Aye. Okay, we are going to, I don't need to read the public hearing again. This is the third meeting on it. So let's just move on to staff's presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Chair, members of the Planning Commission, Al Sabay, Community Development Director. This evening, as the Chair noted, it's a continuation of the meetings that we've had on the San Carlos Transit Village Final Environmental Impact Report. And tonight, staff is again here to support the Commission. We have a number of people here that can answer your questions or present information. We have Michael Kay, who is with Atkins, our environmental impact preparer. Sherry Scott, the architect for Legacy Partners, is also here. Jeff Bird and Jess Couch from Legacy Partners are here this evening. Brian Fitzpatrick with Samtrans is here. Deborah Nelson, our planning manager, and Jill Lewis, associate planner. Camus Steinmetz, representing our city attorney's office. And again, we're all here in a support role, and we will answer questions as needed. And that really concludes staff's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
You want me to introduce you?
Yeah, no, Mr. Chair, Deborah Nelson, Planning Manager. Looks like I need to get IT to come in, and maybe we can just verbally talk about what I want to do a presentation on. In your packet and in your, on the dais are a table of improvement measures. And what I'd like to review before we're done tonight there are improvement measures in the EIR, and there are improvement measures that the staff, having heard the public testimony and your deliberations, have talked about and developed 5 new improvement measures, one for visual quality, one for land use, one for transportation, one for parking, and one for noise. And before we're done, I'll review those when we get it up here. But I would like to encourage you, as you talk, to continue to indicate to us those areas in which you would like us to write improvement measures that go beyond the mitigation measures, where there is not, according to the thresholds of significance, a significant impact under CEQA. There may be measures that you would like to give indication to the developer and to us to help you write, that you would like brought forward to you at the time that you take your motions on the project. Okay, so I'll be back.
Okay.
I'm sorry, two more things. You have 2 pieces of correspondence on the dais tonight, too, one from Norman Miller and one from the Sierra Club.
Okay, so would you like us to move on to the next item on the list of continuing discussion, and then we will come back to improvement measures,
Yes.
maybe in between?
Yes, we
One of
thought you'd be
these.
starting with visual quality tonight.
Okay. So, visual quality. And let's hear from the public on visual quality. Bonnie, are you talking about visual quality, or would you like to come up and talk about something else?
The total.
Okay. About what?
The total project.
The total project. Okay, you know what? We've got only 6 speakers, so why don't you come up and tell me what you want to say? Let's do it that way. And then if I ask down the road and you have something else to say about something else,
Okay.
we'll find a way.
Bonnie McClure, San Carlos resident for 55 years, Sierra Club, a Sustainable Land Use Chairman. The Sierra Club feels that these positive elements and the findings and the improvement measures in the FEIR are a solid basis for the Planning Commission to approve the FEIR, including a density of 280 units, with 15% of those units being built on-site at this time, to move the project forward to Phase 2 of the review process, where further changes and improvements should be made according to our letters.
Thank you, Bonnie. Okay, who's next? Mark Moulton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Mark Moulton. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Leadership Council, and I'm actually here to talk about housing. We have been continuing to meet, and now, although I don't have the ability to show you the PowerPoint, last Friday at Housing Leadership Day, we convinced ourselves that there's a huge number of jobs coming down the pike that we're going to have to respond to as a community if we don't want to increase the number of in-commutes from 170,000 per day. And we're all about trying to see housing built, and we think that the commission ought to go ahead with the FEIR and pass it to the council, and we would certainly support the commission recommending to the council that the project go forward. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Sam? You can talk on visual quality or...
Good evening, Sam Hersberg, 996 Sylvan Drive, member of the Greater East San Carlos Board. Just like to go on record again. There's a belief that the building height and density is out of character compared to the rest of our neighborhood on the east side. We're concerned about the loss of views, about the noise, potential bounce back impacts from not only Caltrain but also high-speed rail. We've been advocating 36 feet with 36-foot height for the majority of the buildings, with the potential for increased height on either end of Holly Street, which is identified as a preferred alternative or a more beneficial environmental alternative in the EIR. So that's more in line with what our thinking is in terms of the visual impacts from the development, and it's a height and density issue. Also, just to clarify, I understand there's housing groups in the Sierra Club, and I'm a member of the Sierra Club too. But I understand some of the groups were offered some incentives by the developer in support of the project, and I'd just like to make sure everybody's on record about if they did receive funding and support of the project, that they're fully disclosing that, so that all the cards are on the table, everything's transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to address that? You don't need a card.
I'm Jess Couch. I'm with the Developer Legacy Partners, and we have never offered anything to anybody in the Sierra Club. The topic hasn't even been discussed. I have no idea where that just came from, but it is false.
Thank you.
We can respond to that too, right? Because we know $75,000 went to Sierra Club as part of a grant.
Please come up to the microphone.
So, hey Jess, what about the $75K that they got from supporting your grant specifically? In order to support your project, they got $75K of state funding. So from somebody else, but they got $75K.
The developer offered them something. We certainly have not.
No.
Okay.
However,
Please
we
don't.
do know
The discussion will be to the commission and not amongst each other.
Okay, Brian, did you or did you not ghostwrite a letter for support groups for this project? Okay, well, we have the public record, and we'll be providing that. And I don't know if it's going to be my time to speak, but it should be soon, so maybe I'll just take it now. One of the things that we're pretty concerned about is that there is a stacked deck against GESC on this project, and we've been asked now to provide public record documentation of a series of emails that are basically being written by city staff, forwarding and informing the developers and Samtrans about internal discussion inside of our neighborhood. I alluded to this last time. We've done a lot more research between that last meeting and now. I mean, obviously I mentioned the legal stuff that was done by the lawyer here that talked about the fear of piecemealing this project and how that could be legally challenged, and we're well aware of that. But I'm talking more specifically about a trend of forwarding internal emails from our neighborhood on behalf of one of our city staff members. And so this is all going to be part of the record that's going to go forward. So really all we're asking you guys for is, we know that the deck has been stacked against us, and so we really want you guys to bend over backwards to try to just at least level the playing field a little bit, rectify this a little bit, and and know that that is going to be coming out in the coming days and weeks. Okay?
Can I ask one question, and that is that obviously no one up here has copies of any of these
Right.
emails or letters or
Right.
the suggestion that
It's just
there's a payment of $75,000 that you mentioned
Right.
to the Sierra Club for something. In order for us to even
Okay.
think about dealing with that, we actually need something in front of us.
Right, but
If-
I want to say Jess Couch is correct, that there has been no specific movement by the developer to incentivize those groups. So that was an incorrect statement. However, we all know that there's a lot of people getting paid in order for this project to occur. The one group that's not, and the group that is pretty much suffering the majority of the damages in terms of property value loss, view loss, all these other things, noise gain, is our neighborhood. So Sierra Club is just on the take like anybody else is. Like this lawyer right here is, she got $50,000, and we know that all that money came in for all these people. And that's where the money was invested. It was invested into obfuscate with high-level legalese and to somehow claim that there's no impact to our neighborhood of this thing. And I mean, you guys are sane people. I mean, you know that that's ridiculous, that there's no significant adverse impact to our neighborhood. So all we're asking for is for you guys to, A, admit there is significant adverse impact to our neighborhood, and B, mitigate, and then C, extrinsically mitigate. So mitigate impact and extrinsically do some cool things for our neighborhood that offset the still existing impact. And if this goes through as no significant adverse impact to our neighborhood, if you guys actually can somehow agree with what all the money from Camas and other people was paid for in order to make it look like there's no impact, then we're going to have, an ongoing battle. However, we are very reasonable people, and we are in the midst of a discussion with some of the same guys in this room that I'm criticizing, and we're trying to find a solution to this. And so I don't want to just speak from a negative, but there is a possibility we can work this out, and that's where we're at right now.
Okay, so any documentation you can provide to us would actually allow us to make it.
We can easily dredge up the 75 Ksers that they're getting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. David?
David Crabb, architect, 289 Crestview in San Carlos. I'm going to have to do one of my two hat things again today, if you can bear with me. First, as far as well, first I'll do my own hat as David Crabb, architect. We talked about visual quality. You all have a letter I sent you which had an alternate proposal for how to do the massing of this project. It's been bouncing around between the developer and the East Side folks and so on. I don't know where it is, but it's out there as an option, and I think it should be considered as part of that negotiation. Now switching over to Sierra Club, as far as we know, no $75,000 came to us from anybody. So I don't know where that's coming from, but it certainly didn't come from us. The other reason we're not being bought off to support this project, we support transitory development all up and down the peninsula. We put our guidelines against this project as well as we do in every other one. In fact, I just came back from South San Francisco for a meeting. We're talking about some projects there. So there's nothing particular to this project that we, is unusual for what we're doing. The third thing from Sierra Club is the way the schedule seems to be set up. You're going to do the review of these sections of the EIR and then possibly look at these additional changes, which you can't mandate, but you can say your expectations are going to be whatever it is. Well, this last letter we sent you, and we apologize, it just landed on your desk this morning. We didn't realize that was in the thing until over the weekend, is that we would like you to think about on those additional changes these items that we have in our letter here, some of which are pretty simple. For example, the exceptions are the changes recommend bicycle connections on the village from the north end to the train station, and we obviously agree with that. But we also think that the developer should be put on notice that we would be looking for places to park those bicycles in his project somewhere. We're not aware of where those are at this point. And some other ideas about signage, directing bicyclists and so on. So that's one easy thing that a developer can do, but we'd like to have it clear to him, to help him, knowing that in phase 2 what's going to be expected. If we don't say it now, he's not going to know or have any reason to be looking for it. Other items we have is some incentives for transit use. It's a transit-oriented development that they could possibly do a transit pass for each tenant for the first year. And we looked it up, and unless the program has changed, Samtrans transit passes are $104 a year for the developer, which is $8.60 a month, so it's peanuts. And they may encourage people to use the transit for the first year, and then if they get used to it, then they can go on from there. And we have several other things. You have the letter in front of us, in front of you. But we would like to see if we could get as many of these in your expectations at this level of the game as possible. And knowing that not all of these can happen, but, as best we can, as much as we can. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Dimitri Vandelos.
Hi. A couple of things. I'm a little surprised by Mr. Krabbe's response. The Sierra Club chapter gets lots of grants. And I think Mr. Fuller misspoke on the source of the grants. But I just looked up on the web and found 2 grants. One is about building climate-friendly communities, and it's in support of the Grand Boulevard project for $50K last year. There was another one for $90,000. They're available on the Loma Prieta Sierra Club website. Climate-friendly communities, January 20th, Loma Prietan newsletter. I believe some of these grants are funding some of the Sierra Club activists who are promoting these types of developments. So certainly they are getting grants. So far, I see no evidence of anything specific from Samtrans or Legacy Partners. Just so you guys are aware. There's a now you might want to search for that where that money came, and et cetera, to follow the money trail. But let's be clear. These agencies are getting grants. They're here, and they have a vested interest in seeing these types of developments. And that's all I'm going to say on that subject. I'm a little confused. I thought we were talking about height and density.
Me too.
Okay, and we've been all over the map here. I would like to comment on height and density a bit. I had a series of pictures that were put up on the GESC website. I don't know if any of the Planning Commission members have ever taken a look at the views that the GESC neighborhoods currently have of the hills. But they're there. We consider them significant to our way of life. And we were very concerned when the draft EIR didn't have any mention of them. My draft EIR feedback contained specific pictures citing the issues we had with the building. We talked about the previous project, the berm, and how it was lowered in order to preserve our views. So I understand Mr. Fuller's frustration, and I sympathize with that because it is very difficult to look at a project of this magnitude with 8 buildings that are all over 50 feet, and then add between 2 to 10 feet, depending on who's doing the measurement between the El Camino side and the greater East San Carlos neighborhood, to have the environmental impact report to say that there's no impacts. What is difficult for our group to deal with is the overwhelming number of issues and how to take the time to encapsulate them and to give that feedback to you. I have yet to send you my feedback on the final EIR because I've been so busy attending these meetings, attending mediation meetings, looking at public records requests, that I'm running out of time. And I certainly hope that the Planning Commission does not have on its agenda tonight to approve the EIR. I'm hoping that you're still going to take the time to do the due diligence to examine the issues. So, and one thing I'd like to bring up regarding that is city staff, after the first meeting, provided a report and said that, hey, we don't have to deal with transit-related, the noise from existing sources, so the noise from the train. And, you know, one could say that's all fine and good, but when you start looking at, and I don't have all the specifics, so realize we are not a grant-funded community group. We are individuals who are looking to preserve and keep our way of life intact, right? So we don't have the time. I have a full-time job. I'm extremely busy, and it's very, very hard to spend all of my free time, cut all of the family time out, and to give you guys the type of reporting that other groups, but the city has paid staff. Their cities being, you know, as lawyers, we have other community groups who, I've just heard that they don't get grant money, but they get grant money. So the deck is stacked. It's very difficult for you have to realize that it is difficult for us to take that time and put all of this information together. So I do, you know, I ask for a little bit of indulgence here so I can get a little bit of time to provide the feedback. But height is, you know, hey, just use your judgment, right? I mean, if the report says there's no impact or it's not significant, how does one quantify what is a significant impact when it comes to views? I find that difficult. I would not want to be in your shoes. How do you quantify that? I can say that for us it would be extremely significant because what's the name of that hill? I walk up it every day. Does anyone know? Yeah, the
When we go walking.
yeah. Excuse me? No, just the one right. You know, the hill that we're going to lose, the mountain.
Belmont Hill.
Yeah, you know, it's going to be obliterated. So there are wonderful views. They're not inside people's homes, but they are part of the fabric and fiber of the neighborhood and the community. So I don't know how to judge that impact. But I do know that to me and to our neighborhood, it is significant. So I'd have far less issue if the report said, yeah, this is an impact, but we feel that the project is important enough to the city to go through with it, right? But let's be honest, you know, but to claim there isn't any when we feel there are, just use common sense, use your judgment. 8 buildings, 55 feet high, no impacts whatsoever. That kind of flies in the face of logic. And that's my, you know, my comment on height and density. And I'll reserve, hopefully, you know, a chance to speak when we talk about other specifics. you.
Thank you. Tim?
Good evening, Tim Hill, 11052 Sylvan Drive. Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on what Dimitri was saying, you know, it really is frustrating that to have a final impact report say that there's absolutely no impacts. One thing that he mentioned was that people won't lose views from their home just from a personal standpoint, and I know it's kind of moot to say this probably, but when I sit in my office and I look right up above my fence, I see that hill every night. See the houses, the lights, all of that, and it really gives me a wonderful feeling to know that I live in such a wonderful area where I can look out my window and see that view. You know, and that goes without saying. You know, seeing that view when I take my kids out for a walk and walk them up and down the streets and be able to see that. Those views are going to be gone. The other thing is, you know, that he asked about, well, how can you quantify this? Well, I think you can quantify this. You can quantify this by looking at our responses in relationship to the general plan and to the impacts that the general plan explains about, you know, relative building height and building density within, you know, certain areas of each other. And one of those is having to do with single-family residences. I won't go into the exact specific numbers. I have that in my report that I gave to you guys. But all I can say is when I made my response to the draft EIR, those were completely set aside, saying that there was no major impacts. So if you do look at the general plan, there are pictures. There's explanations there that talk about the fact that these buildings need to be adjusted to fit in with the surrounding community. 50-foot high buildings almost directly next to 12, 13-foot high buildings, that does not jive with our general plan. So I'm asking you guys as a planning commission to really look at that and to look at how that's going to affect our neighborhood. The last thing I'm going to ask, and this is something that I know the board has been working with in kind of these mitigation issues with the developer, is to move some of this impact south of Holly. Move it to south of Holly. They can do it. They're saying that they can't, but push comes to shove, they can do it. You know, there's too much height, too much density north of Holly Street. Number one, get rid of some of that height and density. You're going to get rid of a lot of other problems that we've been talking about. I mean, this is it right here. This is what we're talking about. Secondly, you know, move it south. You know, make them build higher buildings that are across from businesses if we have to do that. There are ways to think out of the box here. And, you know, as a planning commission, I'd really, really urge you to look into that because that is something that can be done. So I'm just going to leave you guys with this. It's too big. It's too high. Too much density for that area. Bring that stuff down, and you're going to get rid of a lot of these other problems that we've been talking about, too. So, thank you.
So we have a couple more. Gina Vandellos.
Hi, I'm Gina Vandellos, and I live at 988 Montgomery Street. And I think I'm really concerned about the height of buildings, and I wanted to give a little perspective of people on the west side. In my work, I come in contact with lots of families all over San Carlos, and I've been taking kind of an informal poll of these parents, and I just wanted to pass on some of the things I've heard. What that we've been saying, and I agree, is just an eyesore. Too big, too massive. Changing the character of San Carlos. Just doesn't fit into the fabric or the landscape of our community. We've got low buildings in San Carlos. Let's keep it that way. I really want to urge us to, the Planning Commission, to make these buildings smaller. I'm all into public transportation, living by the train. That's why we live in that house. I'm totally into that, but they just need to be smaller, not as many people, and just fit into San Carlos. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Scott, high density,
and come up. You're the next speaker. Why don't you come up to the microphone?
I apologize for going off topic, gentlemen, so since we don't have our lady present tonight. Height and density, so...
She actually is. She's on the phone.
She's on the phone.
Oh, okay, hello, Angela. Sorry about that. So, Brian Fitzpatrick ghost wrote a letter for a housing advocacy group where he specifically said, whatever you do, don't talk about height and density. Those are non-negotiables, essentially. And I know I'm not supposed to look at you, Brian, but I understand very much that this is really the core issue that we've always talked about, and we always kind of tried to be lenient and say that if we could get this thing down to 3 stories, a lot of the problems would go away, as Tim Hilborn just said, and we, being reasonable people, would want to coexist with this thing. And one of the things we're really looking for is that 4-team trade, like the Dwight Howard trade. We want to have a situation where Greater East San Carlos preserves the right to exist. We're calling it GESC 2050, and we're going to be meeting with Al Savay about this. Preserves the right to exist as part of our allowance for this thing moving forward and kind of giving it our blessing through 2050. So this will be our last sort of mega war before this thing gets built, but as a result, these groups will stop going after our right to exist in our community. So what that specifically means is this. It means the single-family residential zoning that exists at my home and Dimitri's home and everybody else's home will be allowed to stay until 2050, that the character of the buildings around our neighborhood, that still remains open to negotiation because we're going to have new things happening around the neighborhood, but it'll bless you. It'll no longer be coming towards our neighborhood. So when I talk about height and density, you can't talk about it in a vacuum. This is something that's going to happen to some degree. There's going to be something built in that area, and it's probably going to be a transit village. Really, it comes down to what can we live with. And so we're now not going to talk about the specifics of our negotiation because we're under strict rules not to discuss those. But with that said, if we really want to have it be a legitimate offering, and that means 2 things. It means reducing some height, and it means reducing some density. And it may not mean exactly what we want and what we've been asking for all along. However, it's going to mean something better than what we currently have. And so we're still at that point right now, but we have to say that the current structure of this cannot have 4 stories at any point alongside our neighborhoods. So we cannot have any buildings that are 4 stories that are directly across from family residences. You can do this sort of math as to what that might mean in terms of the discussions we're having, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, that's it for speaker cards. Do the commissioners have anything that they would like to say about visual quality?
I'm wondering if we can actually return to this.
You want to return to that before talking about visual quality?
Yeah, because it makes reference to certain...
So let's move to the improvement measures so far. This happens to be the first one.
So as you know, there are improvement measures in the draft and final environmental impact report that are in that table S2. We have also attached to the staff report some cumulative improvement measures, which include those that are in the EIR and those that have been suggested by staff. There are 5 of them. We've underlined those like we do with the errata, where new language is shown underlined and corrected language is shown strike through. So one based on your last hearing that would be recommended is regarding visual quality, where you would make a finding that although the proposed project would not result in significant impact or substantially degrade the surrounding visual character, at least according to the thresholds of significance, that there are measures the city could encourage imposing, and that would be provide a landscape screening plan. Now, there are two figures in the draft EIR which show landscape plan. It's certainly, when you look at entitlement phase, should you get there, that would be more significant, and this improvement measure would require adequate landscaping between Old County Road and the elevated train track. That the plan shall be developed and submitted for approval along with the PD plan and development standards depicting at a minimum species, height at maturity, and number of trees.
Can you define adequate landscaping? Because I'm sure that the residents of the neighborhood would define adequate landscaping different than the developer would define adequate landscaping.
And that would be the Planning Commission's decision to make, because this would come in with an application with the PD permit. You could decide what's adequate landscaping.
Okay.
The second, which is new since the last staff report, is regarding land use. And that is that the EIR does state that in addition to the proposed project, the city will rezone the remainder of the railroad corridor according with Resolution 2003-79. As we talked about last week, the application is for a part of the railroad corridor land. So the remainder land would be a city-initiated project to rezone and to include within that rezoning the kinds of uses that are required and suggested in that resolution. So you would make a finding about the proposed project of an improvement measure that the intended rezoning of the railroad corridor would not conflict with the municipal code. This is a finding regarding land use because it's in that chapter. But there are other measures that the city can encourage. In this case, it's the property owner, because the development project does not cover the remainder land, that they would implement, and you would impose conditions of approval. So at such time as the city, the improvement measure would be at such time as the city initiates the rezoning, we would ask for a landscape plan and the uses that are anticipated on the remainder lands. Then the third, we've looked at this before, and Mr. Crabb suggested it as well, and that is bicycle plan, which is how bicycle users get from the north end of the project to the transit station. We did not put in this anything about bike lockers. That is in our parking ordinance. This would be a physical feature to design travel ways within the development. And that would also come in with the PD plan and development standards application. Another one you've already talked about, and we put in the questions to answers, that was back in July, between the July 30th meeting and your meeting on October 1st. Is that right? No, August? I forget, whenever it was.
Okay.
It's been a long time. But the questions, the answers to questions, we looked at, you had in your packet a description of an LOS for walking and what encourages, and Commissioner Silberman brought this up, what encourages people to walk a distance within a parking lot. So this improvement measure would have a parking plan that helps you look specifically at the landscape and the features within the parking lot design that in parking lot design standards make it more pleasant for pedestrians to walk so that people would use it to park. And that would include landscape, shade, and other features. And then the last one would be noise. Well, this came up a couple of hearings ago regarding when your discussion regarding slapback, although the noise does not exceed the 3DA criteria within the general plan, you certainly could require noise attenuating construction material on the east-facing facade of the proposed project. And that also would come in with the development plan application. So we'd encourage you, as you talk further about this, to also talk about other improvement measures that you might want us to present back to you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, would you like to go through some of these, or would you like to continue on with visual quality? I think before we move on to visual quality, it might be more useful to sort of go through some of the things that we've already talked about and actually see if there are additional improvement measures that we could recommend at this time.
When you say at this time, you mean discuss them at this time? Because I think we don't
I
approve
think-
them until the end, right?
Right. I think what we're trying to do is to give direction to staff.
Yeah. I mean, I
okay?
have some that I
And-
will want to kick around.
Just on the things that we've already talked about, not
No additional ones.
when I say things that we've talked about, topics we've talked about, like parking. Or-
Yes, I think all of them fit into categories that we've talked about, except for one, which fits into no category.
In which case, we'll probably talk about that under other issues and concerns, which is at the bottom of the...
It does fit into that, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you want to start?
Sure. One is the pedestrian crossings. My reading of the final EIR is that the current plan has a plan for improvements of the crossing at Cherry. And specifically, it mentions accent pavement at Cherry. And I was thinking that I, at least at this point, until I understand that it's a bad idea, would like some consideration as to improving the crossing at Arroyo as well. And I also thought about the crossing at Olive, but I'm guessing that's probably a bad idea because it's not going to have a signal, and it would just further, cause problems with traffic on El Camino. But at a minimum, I would like us to consider potentially, as an improvement measure, improving the crossing at Arroyo. And I don't know whether that's limited to accent paving or also, other, other changes that might improve the crossing, like, for example, like the flashy lights, one of those kinds of things. I also, as an improvement measure, would like us to consider increasing the amount of parking. And when I say that specifically, at a minimum, I'd like to see, as an improvement measure, increase. Well, actually, should I stop for a second and find out what you guys think of my first thought?
I don't necessarily think that we're going to have discussion about each of your topics
Okay.
as much as
Get it on the record.
let's get them on the record so that staff can actually start looking at these and provide us with some impact.
Okay.
Is that, because otherwise we're sort of having this discussion without
Fair enough.
having staff involved in
Sure.
it.
Okay. The other, so basically with respect to parking, I would like to see as an improvement measure, at a minimum, increasing the amount of parking to at least replace the number of spaces that are lost on El Camino. And I'd also think that I'd like to see it in a way that that increased parking is not simply normal paid Caltrain parking, that there be some 2-hour spaces in that same parking area that can compensate for the spaces lost due to the spaces on El Camino being lost. I also, yeah.
And I'm going to tag on to that a little bit and talk about additional spaces for, again, free parking, because otherwise, and in talking about in the past where the impact of moving the parking further away from the station and the impact of that parking on the residential neighborhood on the east side, I want that to be a piece of this whole parking lot. And whether we need to implement permit parking, whether we need to solve that parking problem that is created by the berm and all the construction that went on there and the loss of all the free parking that existed there, that also has to be a piece of this.
Okay. The next, and I don't know if you can include this as one improvement measure, but I looked at the improvement measures that were, well, I'm characterizing them as improvement measures that the Sierra Club suggested in their letter, and I'm not suggesting that that it might not be a good idea to recommend implementing all of them, but there were some specific ones that seemed relatively straightforward, and those included the telecommunications center, the on-site daycare facility, the bicycle-friendly path, which I think is already incorporated, at least to some extent, in an existing improvement measure now, the bike parking, the transit incentive, the green building materials, which I think is at least partially reflected already by existing improvement measures, the use of solar, electric charging stations, and sustainable landscaping. I'd like to see improvement measures that incorporate those recommendations. And then the last one, and this is kind of a difficult one, and I mentioned this, and perhaps Mr. Fitzpatrick may want to comment about it now, later, or never. Oh, you wanted me to wait on the one that it doesn't fit into any categories. That,
You're on a roll. We'll just go with it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I know that folks have expressed concern about the potential impact of high-speed rail, high-speed trains in the future, and basically the response, as I understand it, is that that's not going to happen. So, and I'm being slightly rhetorical here. I'm not intending to be critical. In fact, I should comment generally. I thought that there were some quasi-personal attacks earlier today that weren't very productive. But, the response has been, that's not going to happen, so don't worry about it. And I think that there should be a way to shift the risk, even if it's very small, that there's going to be an impact from high-speed rail from the city and the East Side residents to the developer and or Caltrain, excuse me, not Caltrain, Samtrans. So what I would like to see is something that basically says that if due to the use of the right-of-way, it becomes necessary to utilize Old County Road, that instead there's something built in where basically, I mean, I'm being again rhetorical, Samtrans and or Caltrain and or the developer needs to figure out a way so that that using the right-of-way doesn't impact Old County Road. And I was thinking there may be a way to ensure that risk or something, but I would like to see something, an improvement, a plan to ensure that that risk is not borne by the city.
I agree. I think that one of the ways that we could do that, and I've actually been thinking about that myself, is to make absolutely certain that whatever transit agency, it could be Samtrans that owns that piece of property, leaves absolutely enough room, even if they have to leave extra room, because the only way that I can see to sort of create it so that Old County Road is, shall we say, inviolate, is to say something as simple as you cannot use Old County Road until all of the property between Old County Road and El Camino has been used for transit. That would require them to purchase back the buildings from Legacy, if needed, to actually construct additional transportation system in that space so that it makes it cost prohibitive for them to actually go out into Old County Road. Okay.
And I was thinking about the same thing, except I was thinking what they would have to do is they would have to insure against that risk happening, so
Yes.
the money would it would exist to pay for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether that's possible, but and you don't have to comment now. In fact, this is something I think again that's for our consideration, assuming that the EIR is certified at the time of project approval. But I want to observe that that's important to me,
Yes.
and I'd like to see some sort of improvement measure that contemplates solving that problem. And I'd also just like to observe if the risk is that small. I mean, if the risk is infinitesimal, then it shouldn't be that hard to insure against it.
Yeah. Jesse.
I don't know if there's anything else to add to that. Now, most of my observations and what I wanted to get on record were related to parking. I'm just not comfortable at this point right now with the way it's laid out. I think there needs to be a lot more parking. And I've been observing for the last 2 weeks the El Camino parking situation. I don't know if it's just in the last 2 weeks or what, but there seems to be a lot more parking on El Camino ever since our last meeting mentioning it. So I really just want to look at that parking situation a little more closely with mitigating any potential issues with, either permit parking, monthly passes, anything that can be, help mitigate that parking situation, as well as hopefully maybe even taking some of those residential parking spaces that are allowed for guests to some of the office or 2-hour parking.
One of the suggestions I heard recently was the idea of, and I don't know whether this is possible or not, but I would love to hear from the developer about this, is that the 2 commercial buildings that sit on either side of the depot, the idea that one of those could be turned into potentially housing, and the idea of lowering the height north of Hawley, and that would also augment the problems with the parking, which also happens to be tied in a lot of cases here to concerns about commercial parking and less about residential parking. Just an idea that I've heard thrown out there. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to do it or not. I'm just saying that that's one of the ideas that I've heard bandied about. And it seems at the moment from the housing individual, Mark, that housing seems more valuable at the moment than jobs, because we seem to be getting jobs no matter what, but housing seems to be something that is more of a challenge. So just an idea. Michael?
Well, that was on my list, something similar, where I think the retail space, I don't want to call it an afterthought in the plan, but it just seems like, based on the size of the project, it just seems that it was thrown into the mix sort of as a token, and it's creating more issues with parking, with the utilization of the space, and I don't really see the value there, considering, and I don't know for sure if 1001 Laurel retail space, if anything's even gone into that building yet. But if anything, adding retail space in this setting, I think, is not the best idea when parking is such a premium and clearly a concern to the East San Carlos neighborhood as well. I think that's an expendable part of this project, and I think it can be rethought to maximize some of the other issues that this project has. And to kind of dovetail off of that, and it seems like one of my passionate issues, and I understand this, is your concern in the East San Carlos neighborhood is the parking issue, and I think a permit parking plan should be implemented into this plan in advance of moving ahead with the project, because I can almost guarantee that it's going to be an issue down the road, and why wait until it becomes an issue and creates a lot more problems? Why not address it now?
Can I suggest we talk about a free permit parking to the residents over there as opposed to a charge for the parking when we have that discussion?
I agree. If it can be done and when it is a minimal cost in other programs, I don't see that it could not be factored into the cost of the project. So yes, I agree. Let's see, the bike parking has already been discussed. I agree with that. I think we need to have a little bit better plan there. And the lighting on the west side of El Camino, I think, is rather inadequate, considering that if this project does materialize, it's almost going to be a beacon on the east side of El Camino, and the west side is going to be rather dwarfed, so to speak, in terms of the presence that it has. I think it's just going to be minimized even more. So I think some supplemental lighting should be also worked into the plan along the west side of El Camino on the entire length of the retail area. And that's all I have.
Angela, you still with us?
I'm still with you.
Do you have additional comments you'd like to add?
Yes, I do. First of all, I echo many of the issues raised by the other commissioners. I think in particular, some things I want to address are the increase in commercial parking. I just think it's necessary, and I don't believe that any sort of study in parking could be reasonably complete if we don't know what businesses are going to be there. I just don't know how you can determine the parking demand for those businesses. And if we have successful commercial entities in those places, I can easily imagine the parking being in high demand, not just for the residents who are there in the transit village, but also for those who do not live there wanting to drive to it. So I think that some sort of increase in commercial parking has to happen. Speaking of parking, I also believe that a permit parking plan will eventually probably need to be in place. Of course, it's up to the residents. The residents have to vote on it, and they have to agree on it. If the residents do vote and agree on the permit parking, I believe it should be free for residents for a minimum of, say, 25 years. Maybe the developer pays the administrative costs of issuing the residential permits and, of course, permits per household for their guests. But that is the only way I see to keep people, particularly people who are trying to park for Caltrain, from parking in the East Side neighborhood. It doesn't mean it's the only way possible. It's just the only way I see it being possible. But if a permanent parking does exist, it has to be free for the residents. That's an improvement measure I would add. I echo the part about the high-speed rail consideration and not having the impact moved to Old County Road, and I do think that that's something that can be ensured. I also agree about shifting some of the mass to south of Holly. I think it makes sense. Quite frankly, I think it would fit in better with the city since most of the residents live south of Holly. I think it would actually work better as a residential community if some of the mass were shifted south of Holly. And yeah, so those are some of the improvement measures I had. And I did have one question. I guess maybe for staff. I tried to. I went into CEQA and I tried to understand how an impact was considered significant, specifically around a view. And I guess my question is, how many people does it have to affect before an impact of a view is considered significant? And how do you determine a prominent view? That would just be a question. If Deborah or somebody there can answer that for me.
This is Camus Steinmetz, City Attorney's office, and there's no specific number, but generally it needs to affect a public view, a broad, expansive view, as opposed to individual views from individual properties. So there's case law that has looked into this issue, and there's various case law determinations on this, but generally CEQA looks at the environment as a whole as opposed to the environment of individual persons and private property impacts.
Right, but how does CEQA determine the project as a whole? I mean, that's what I mean. Like, how many people or residents or, area around the project, how much area around the project would it have to impact in order for it to be considered significant under CEQA? I did try to read it, I just couldn't figure that out.
Well, in the aesthetics, maybe Michael can speak to this, but there's thresholds of significance that the EIR uses to determine impact on aesthetics. And so, for example, the impact on scenic vistas is one of them. And typically, I don't know, Michael, if you want to speak to this. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, with Atkins, I've spoke before. Camus is right. We use this thresholds of significance that are included in CEQA guidelines. We supplemented them with some of the descriptions that the city uses for recognition of scenic corridors, for example. But there are no solid rules. There's not a number. If it affects 500 people, then a significant impact. If it's less than 500 people, it's not a significant impact. That just doesn't exist. But as Camus said, typically you look at recognized scenic vistas that are adopted in either a city plan or a county plan, or if there are state scenic highways, where their views would be affected from a project from a state scenic highway. Private property typically is not considered significant views under CEQA. It's generally something like a park, or if there obviously is a scenic outlook someplace. The views themselves, typically words to describe the views are such as wide-ranging views, prominent features, some other language such as view that is visible from a wide expanse, or if it's a specific rock outcropping that is very prominent, or special features such as waterfalls or mountaintop But in general, like we've been reiterating, the views from someone's backyard or from their front yard are not considered scenic vistas for the purposes of a CEQA analysis. And that doesn't mean that those views are not important to those individuals. It's just that they're not considered when a determination is made whether or not a project would have a significant impact on a scenic vista.
And, for those who are interested, it's covered in the draft EIR in section 3.3 from pages 15 to 36. I mean, it discusses each one of the various significance criteria and the analysis that was done.
Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you.
Okay. I'm going to come back to visual quality in just a minute. I want to get through sort of my improvement measures, and then we'll come back, because I don't think the commissioners, we've really spent a lot of time on visual quality. We went to this first. We'll come back to visual quality. Sure. Thank you, Michael. Okay, so improvement measures. So I want to go back to noise. And I know we talked about noise-absorbing material on the outside of the surface of the building. I want to throw in trees in there because it was actually recommended by the consultant. I want to throw in the idea of a potential window replacement project for noise bouncing back off the building into the residential neighborhood. Just, these are all ideas open for discussion. I think we should...
What do you mean, like replace the windows of the East Side residents?
Yes, either through low-income loans, very much the same way they do it at the airport. Okay? And I've seen similar locations where developers have put money into programs where they will actually better the environment around their project. Another idea is, that was talked about in the 2003 resolution, which -97, which talks about the establishment of a Caltrain quiet zone for San Carlos. If we can lower the volume of those whistles, and they don't need to blow the whistles, that may also be something that we should talk about as a way to reduce noise. On the flip side, there's now 6 additional trains, more than there were when the noise study was actually presented, so maybe some of this stuff will balance out. I'm going to move on to some of the transportation improvement measures. We talked about the idea of Old County. Another thing that sort of has bothered me that hasn't really been discussed in all of this is the electrification of Caltrain and the location of the electrification poles. And with the idea that the new development will be so close to the tracks, that may push the electrification poles from the west to the east side of the railway, the railroad right-of-way. And I want to make sure that just because that project is going in doesn't mean that those poles are going to move to the east, okay? And that hasn't really even been addressed. Another thing with that is I'd like to see those poles when they go in, and the only pictures I've seen of them are 40 or 50-foot poles, sort of be hidden to the greatest extent possible, similar to the cell towers, where we essentially make them look like trees. And so that's a concern that I have about the electrification and this whole project in relation to electrification. The parking improvement measures, I'd like to see us look at the parking on El Camino that is left after the project is or after we talk about the approval of the project, and see whether We need to change some of the timed spaces that are there. Are they now appropriate with where the location of the parking is? We talked about permit parking. I would like to see us look at a long-term parking program to be implemented by Caltrain for dealing with people who take Caltrain to the airport and who will eventually be using high-speed rail and may need to park for more than 24 hours, which is all that is allowed in a Caltrain parking lot right now. So if we're going to move to a high-speed rail, or even people who right now are using the airport, they have nowhere to park if they're going to take public transportation to get to the airport. So I'd like to see something along that line. We will come back to visual, and let's see, I think we talked about most of the rest of that. Are
you guys punting on height and density, or is that going to be discovered?
No, we're not. We're getting back to visual quality in just a little bit. Okay, we're trying to go through things that have already previously been discussed here. Okay, let's move back to visual quality. You have anything to, Michael, anything on visual quality? Okay. So, Michael, could you come back up to the microphone here? Thank you. Yes. So, one of the many things I struggle with here is sort of levels of significance. And I can see that the audience is also struggling in many cases with, why isn't this labeled as significant? And for me, visual quality is one of those things that when I look at it right from the beginning, I go, why isn't this a significant impact? And you explained under CEQA, it's not a significant impact. But CEQA also states that it must be, it must jive with our general plan, okay, and the policies in our general plan. So I'm going to take a second here and read one of those policies because I think it's appropriate. And it's policy LU 8.19. And it says...
Let me get my other copy of this.
And it's actually one of about 20 different places where visual quality and significant impacts to vision are stated all throughout everything that we have here. So I'm actually going to read it. Residential structures shall be designed to be compatible with existing structures in the vicinity. Avoid obstructing views from adjacent structures or views of community importance. Okay? Right there, when I look at the development, I go, it's not really doing anything to avoid obstructing views. And in fact, when I look at the view corridors, I actually look at the view corridors and I go, if I'm standing in the middle of the street, I now have a view of the hills. But if I'm standing in anyone's yard or looking out anyone's window, okay, they no longer have the view that they had, okay? And this is one of the policies in our general plan. And so I'm trying to figure out how this is not a significant impact for the individuals.
You're kind of mixing land use with visual, so that policy was actually addressed in the land use discussion. There's a table that describes all the policies from the general plan that might apply to the project and whether or not the project is compatible. So we did discuss that and stated that there would be no conflict. And again, CEQA it deals with terms like substantially degrade.
Yeah, but we're talking about our general plan here. We're not talking about CEQA anymore, because the relationship to CEQA is only through the fact that it has to be our general plan, has to be, it has to agree with our general plan, right?
Then that is more of a land use issue than a visual issue then. The visual discussion talks about the potential impacts of the project based on thresholds of significance having to do with visual resources. You do have a general plan with policies that guide development within the city, which is discussed in the land use section.
Okay, so irrelevant of whether it's under land use or visual quality, how does this jive with the existing, the fact that you are actually not designing structures? I don't know, whether you design them at an angle so that they could see what they're going to do?
Well, I don't know how to explain this. It's a difficult topic. Let me read the...
I couldn't make that work.
Okay, the way we resolved that in the discussion of the policies of the general plan that apply to the project, we stated that the proposed project would not obstruct significant views of the Las Pulgas Ridge. And so we're getting back to the visual impacts analysis, where we said the substantial views are broad, far-reaching, important views.
But to me, you're confusing CEQA with the general plan, okay? Because CEQA talks about significant views. Nowhere in the general plan here in this land use policy does it talk about significant views. It talks about avoid obstructing views from adjacent structures. Now, doesn't say anything about significant views. It just says of obstructing views from adjacent structures. These are...
Then, in a sense, the city's hands are tied. Nothing could ever be built because you would be blocking a view if you put a structure next to an existing structure.
Okay. I understand
Mr.
that.
Chairman, if I could add to that, it says avoid. And what we've heard in the past from the architect, in one of the first meetings, the architect went through the project and showed how the design of the project and the siting of the buildings had been modified over time to take advantage of what public views were available from public streets. So there have been modifications to, and we, of course, we could have the architect walk the commission back through how the development has been sited to maintain those public views on the roadways mostly, and how portions of the building have been stepped from 2, 3, and 4 stories. So I think that the architect showed that there have been changes to try to minimize and to enhance the public views. So I think that has occurred. It's not like nothing has occurred over time. Not that I'm trying to defend the development, I'm just stating the facts that I heard and I think the commission heard at a couple of meetings ago when the architect walked you through the project.
And I see how the development was stepped, but actually in all of those places where they've actually stepped down the development, it doesn't create any additional views that I could see.
then that would be something that we would need to, if that's a very significant issue with the chair and the rest of the commissioners, we ought to have the architect walk you through that again. So you have that availability at some point tonight.
Okay.
A couple other points I'd like to make, if I might.
Sure.
There's been a lot of discussion that the document determined there would be no impact to visual resources. And from a CEQA standpoint, that's not what the conclusion is. The conclusion is that there would be a less than significant impact. And I know it's just splitting hairs, but at least that recognizes that there will be a change in the visual environment associated with the project. That change has not been ignored. We just said based on the standards of significance used by CEQA and by the city, this change in the visual environment would not rise to a level of significance that would require a mitigation measure. So we acknowledge that there are going to be changes to the visual environment. We just said that these don't rise to a level of significance.
I think that's one of the problems that the people who are here are having, is that they would feel better if you actually said that, yes, there is a significant impact, but there's not a whole lot we can do about it. And I understand that it's not easy to do that, because once you declare it significant, then you have to do everything you can in order to mitigate.
Well, we're certainly not afraid to call it an impact significant if, in our professional opinion, it's considered significant. And in the case of the visual impacts, we just couldn't come up, we wouldn't be able to justify a conclusion that it was significant based on the standards that are used.
Even looking through the entire general plan, there was nothing that you could find in the general plan at all that would have been able to allow you to say that it was not a significant impact, but that it didn't necessarily jive with the general plan.
I think if I might.
Go ahead.
The general plan issue, that's in the land use category.
Mm-hmm.
And with respect to the general plan, the question is the project compatible with these general goals and policies of the general plan? So the general plan policies are not the thresholds of significance for the visual impact section. The visual impact section, there's 4 thresholds of significance.
Okay.
And the conclusion was that, yes, there are impacts, but the impacts did not rise to the level of significance. They didn't exceed those thresholds of significance. Now, with the visual policies in the general plan, the question is the project generally compatible with these policies? If they're not compatible, then that's considered a land use impact, because the question in the land use section is the project generally compatible with the general plan, zoning, the other city regulations governing that are applicable to the project site. So policy LU 819 is discussed at page 3.2-10 in the table. And the conclusion is that there's no conflict. It refers you to policy LU 7.4. And as Michael said, it does circulate back to the visual impact section. I think that the interpretation of this policy, as Al said, the policy is to avoid obstructing views from adjacent structures or views of community importance. And so the interpretation is that those are significant impacts to the community, and specifically adjacent to the project site.
So having sat on the Residential Design Review Committee, I know that when you have a building that sits and that has a view of the bay, that you cannot block more than 50% of that view without having staff work with you to redesign your project. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's a single isolated building. We're looking at it from the other side, where people have that exact same type of view of the hills. Okay? we're saying that we can essentially wipe out the view from everyone in an entire neighborhood of the view of the hills. And that's okay. This is what I'm struggling with, okay? Because what you're saying is that the view from the top down is significant to a point where even half of somebody's view is lost, then the project will have to be modified. Whereas you can wipe out the view from 400 people or 500 people looking up, and that's not significant. And I think that's part of the problem that people are having. So how do we jive that?
I don't think that the view would be completely obliterated for the entire neighborhood. The hill would still be visible from atop the existing structure, the proposed building, the farther away you got from it. It really would only be extremely visible from the residences immediately adjacent to the project site. And as I said, farther away you go, the less prominent the proposed project would be in relation to the overall landscape. The other kind of not issue, but if I live in a single-family residence that is a one-floor building, and then my next-door neighbor wants to put a second floor in that building that blocks my view, then is that a significant impact that is worthy of environmental document? It's, you know, I recognize that the proposed project is much larger than strictly a single-family addition, but based on the policy that you're not supposed to block any views, then the...
That's what I'm trying to understand here. Then why is it significant for somebody who builds in the hills who is blocking somebody else's view versus the opposite?
I can't speak to that. I don't know what the city's policies are in terms of hillside view protection.
Okay.
I would hate to speculate for fear of misspeaking.
I can say that it's not considered, at least in my specific instance where we had a neighbor add on to their house, and we were essentially told views are not guaranteed. It's not blocking a window of yours. So if it fell within the parameters of the building codes, which it did, we did not have a valid complaint. And it doesn't matter the location within the city, I don't believe.
Is that the case?
I guess I'd refer back to Camus's comment about the question for the general plan, is the project generally compatible with the general plan? And we also look at zoning and other regulations. So from this general plan language, which was taken from previous general plan and zoning, the application of this policy for single-family residential design review next to single-family residential, which also has design review, would be applied, and the 50% I think is never written any place. It's something that we use as what is a significant view or not, and each of those projects is determined against the general plan, because the Residential Design Review Committee must make a finding, and also against the zoning. Everybody has very equivalent rights under the zoning ordinance in the same zoning district. So when this policy is applied to the creation of the zoning ordinance and the designation in the general plan and the zoning of the Transit Village project as a mixed-use, medium-density zoning district in distance to the single-family residential neighborhood, it is applied relative to that difference in land use.
So the difference in districts is taken into consideration, and the general plan sets forth the broad policies that are ultimately implemented by the zoning ordinance. So for interpretation of the general plan policies, you might look to the zoning ordinance, and there's different regulations depending on which zoning district you're in. And this policy, as Deborah says, is generally looked at when you're in the same zoning district.
Same
And these are
zoning
two separate zoning districts butting up against each other.
Okay. From my perspective, I would like to see an improvement measure.
Okay.
And I like your improvement measure of trees. I'm a little concerned with waiting until the development project, the plan for the project actually comes to us, as far as setting some sort of standard. Because I'm afraid that what's going to come back and what we're going to be arguing over is the number of trees. So we talked earlier about the existing landscaping plan and whether we could take a look at that. Is that something that we can take a look at? So let's take a look at that, because I want to see how we can go about addressing this as an improvement project, an improvement measure.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask Sherry Scott if Ms. Scott has a site plan where she can go through the trees that were proposed. There's the landscape sheets. You see it there. Left-hand side.
Right
Right there,
there,
yeah.
left.
There we go.
Actually, okay, so
This is
I'm
what-
Sherry Scott with Christiani Johnson Architects, and so I'm just going to walk through the site plan briefly, and then also at the end of this document, we have a few additional plans that were developed for the landscaping on the east side. That was a result of maximizing the planting on the east side of the berm while still preserving the sight lines for Caltrain. So again, this is the portion of the site north of Holly. This is Holly Street on the right of the slide here, and just quickly, I'll just point out. I'll get to landscaping, but that the intent with the design of the project and the massing of the buildings was to break the views along with the street corridors. There is a underground storm sewer here, which is can't be built across, which actually dictated how the first building for this north laid out. But we did reduce the building height here to 3 stories and to 2 stories here at building 2, in line with the street frontages. And so, and then we have open view corridors at these 2 streets here. Again, so there's planting along the west side that's compatible with the Grand Boulevard plan, and then the east side berm here, you can see some of the planting here. These trees are the existing on the west side of the berm, and these trees are on the west side as well, the redwood trees. And so this is the view from the east side, and so this planting here is an illustration of improved planting on the east side of the berm. So there's a lot more ground cover on the east side. I know that right now there's some ground cover there, but hasn't really ever filled in. I don't know if it's an irrigation issue or whatnot. The trees also are not of substantial size, even though they've been there for 15 years. And so the intent is to replace the planting on the east side to the greatest extent possible, while still maintaining the sight lines for the train. I know that there was quite a bit of study done, even building mock-up trees on the site. This is an illustration of the line of sight studies that were done, and they actually did build trees, fake trees. I think we have some images of those in section to ensure that the operation of the train wouldn't be hindered by the planting. So basically the intent of these landscape improvement documents is to get the maximum amount of planting that we could get and still allow the train to function.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
The trees that are there now,
Mm-hmm.
that you say in 15 years have not really grown that much, is there an issue with planting anything there that would hinder average or reasonable growth? I mean, if the trees that were there, that are there now were removed and replaced with other ones, would
Different
they
species
still?
of trees, right.
But is the location limiting the growth of whatever you would put there?
You should probably defer to the, I'm not the landscape architect, so I don't want to get too far off into the weeds, literally.
Yeah, no, Jeff Bird with Legacy Partners, I just want to help. Sherry's trying to answer questions about landscaping, but she is an architect, not a landscape architect. But the process that we're talking about was engaged by our landscape architect. So the processes that she's pointing out occurred there. In the review, he looked at and determined new species that could go in that would be more substantial and that would grow better there. So in part, that's the trees that are on the east side currently are large bushes. That's really what they are. That's the way they're designed to grow, and that's what they are. So the intention is, if we can go back to the landscape plan, however you do that magically with your thing, I will try and highlight. I wish I had like a laser thingy.
You use the mouse. You can
I'm going to walk over there.
You can use the pointer.
Okay, there. I use the
Yeah.
mouse. Yes. I wouldn't have any clue.
We don't know.
Okay, well, I'll let you do that part, but in any case, so along the berm right now, these trees do not exist. So these trees are redwoods that are being proposed to be introduced, with a sensitivity in particular that, I can't read and I forget the name of the street here, but I think this is Riverton. So, I'm sorry? I think that's Riverton. Am I right? Is it?
Yeah.
It's
Riverton.
Springfield, Sylvan, Inverness, Riverton, and then when we get over here to Northwood, the property doesn't even actually exist. In this case, because of this alignment issue, because the sewer goes here mid-block and the building needed to occur here, we did the breakdown here, the focus is wherever we could here on this side to continue and add redwoods. These trees over here, I think, are a variety of redwood, and they're at their younger stages and haven't had a lot of, call it, the more induced irrigation that they would have when we came into the site. So you'll see them start to grow a little faster as that occurs. But these are existing here. These are existing here.
Springfield, Sylvan, Inverness,
Riverton.
Yeah, okay. So the idea was we introduced redwoods here. They needed to stop starting here because of, right here you see this is part of the signaling system that goes here. So from a line of sight to see the signaling, they needed that we couldn't add trees here and here and here, which frankly was more of an open area anyway. So largely these folks that are living over here are going to have two layers of trees. So what happened is we had bigger redwood trees here, somewhat a different variety, and I can't tell you the reason that the landscape architect selected two varieties, but maybe some variation or whatever. But a new variety that's more substantial in this location and much more substantial in this area. And I think he picked a bigger variety in this location because I maybe felt like the layering here worked well between these two species, and then picked a species here that was more substantial because of this line of sight issues with trains seeing these signals that occur right here, that we were not able to introduce more trees in this particular location. Now, in addition to that, we did introduce some trees in these locations, and also try and understand that this only depicts the trees, does not depict any of the other vegetation that's to occur. That's kind of reflected in some of these other plans here. But the idea there is that we can add some substance with bushes and ground cover that isn't just low ground cover, but things that grow significantly taller and that fill in there. So, and that's clearly our objective. We are totally in agreement, because what's good in this case, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Any views from any units or residences on this side back this way, they get the benefit of whatever greenscape is here, rather than
It just makes sense to me that the people who are going to live in these are not going to want to look down in people's backyards who've been there for 50 years.
And the other thing is, frankly, they won't be looking, and we're really more concerned about just taking advantage of making this berm a green space rather than than what it is now, which is fairly unattractive, given that there's trains and things going there today. So these are all new trees in through here, and these are all new trees here, bigger varieties, and then all of the groundscape and shrubs would be entirely replaced, new irrigation throughout. So we're in total concurrence there, but a lengthy process that Jesse went through with the engineering folks at Caltrain determined that this zone was not much of a prospect, and I'm not thinking this was, but we have this pretty dense group of redwoods that are going to grow up pretty substantially there. I think we've got a pretty good layer. Now, subsequent to that, one of the things that we looked at, and tell me shut up and go away when you don't want to hear any more of this, but we talked initially about we would also be open to the idea of introducing landscaping on this side. The challenge initially when we got into the project was with the utilities that were there, that wasn't going to be practical. Fortunately, in this evolution, the city has already approved a process that has the East Side Connect project, which does a whole lot of things to the curbs and sidewalks over here and underground utilities, and introduces street trees. So in addition, and one of the things that's not depicted here, and frankly we're doing with the neighborhood group later in the week, is we're going to go walk the area and help some perspective building on what views are there or aren't. Because one of the things that happens is there's this assumption that we make in our mind's eye that when you're standing right here along Old County Road, that you're going to see, that either you see these hills or that you're going to see a lot of this building. The fact is the berm is fairly tall there, and particularly with the introduction of landscaping, you really don't see the hill from that location. The berm cuts off that view, and the landscaping, wherever that might occur, landscaping fills in. And as you get into the neighborhoods, there is an urban forest there are buildings, and as you start to walk down the street, within the time you're past one or two houses in, there's so much landscaping that the only view you really wind up having is if you happen to be standing in the middle of the street looking straight back this way. Well, by preserving the openings that have been created, which are really mimic the continuation of the street down, you would still see those areas, except for the fact that the berm's in the way, and you still have that line of sight there. But when you start to look at either angle, the existing street trees and building structures prevent you from seeing it. And by the time you're in about 4 or 5 houses, you're far enough back, and as you get further up back into the block, some people start to see the hill again above.
And I was going to say,
that will be above the project as well.
And I've never seen a picture of anywhere in the neighborhood where the project has been depicted and you see the hill above it.
Well, I think that can be worked on, number one. Number two, what I would encourage you to do is if you would go to Dimitri's pictures that he submitted a long time ago, you'll see some examples actually where you wouldn't see the project. And most of those pictures, for example, there are 2 of them that occur on Northwood, which is up here, off the screen, looking back toward the hill, saying this project's going to get in the way of the hill. The project won't be there, but there happens to be a 3-story version of this, which is the existing extended stay hotel, that you can see little teeny bits of it starting to stick up. And what I think is helpful when you see that is you start to learn the perspective. That's a 3-story version of this that's across there, and you really can't see it. It's well below the hill at those locations. And the fact is there's not going to be obstruction of views in the vast majority of these locations. And that's something that I need to work with. The intention has always been that when we get into looking at the actual project and the actual design of the project, that is the opportune time to look at where the trees are and the views and the buildings and the modulation. And that's really been the expectation. And the idea is that certainly at that point there will be a lot more focus on that, because up till now we've been working on these technical issues that the city's consultants have been working on of EIR related, but certainly we're sensitive to that. We know there's a desire to have as much buffer and landscaping for a variety of reasons through here, and to understand what views or views aren't going to be there. And if you do like I have, I've spent 10s, 20s, 30s of hours walking through the neighborhood personally and taking pictures and looking to get a perspective of where you might actually see and not see the building. And there's a lot of confusion that people don't realize that they're not going to see a building in lots of locations. And any of you that want to come out and
I was going to ask you.
join us,
Yeah, when is it?
well, I don't know how that works, and I don't know all the Brown Act rules and things like that.
Coordinated through Al.
But we can set up separate, I'm happy to set up separate
Deborah.
walkthroughs with any individual to keep
Or
there
both
from
of
being
them.
problems on multiples or whatever.
So getting back to the diagram here, it seems like there's a tremendous amount of open space here in this particular diagram. As far as the number of trees and the spacing between the trees. See, I took a transit-oriented development tour down at Franklin Street, and I was up on the second or third floor of Franklin Street, and the train went by, and I couldn't see it. There was such a dense area of trees between the train and the building. And what I see here is just sort of a smattering of trees, okay? And so my concern in some ways is the density of those trees and whether we can increase the density of those trees. And the second thing that I have a concern is that all of these trees, the redwoods that are being newly planted and the redwoods that are already there, those are in the right of way, and if high-speed rail comes along, those are going to disappear.
I can't speak to that.
Right, so.
I'm not, I don't know what the high-speed rail looks like.
I'm just saying.
If it
that
ever occurs.
I'm looking at the yellow space back there and saying, behind the redwoods, and saying, how come there's no trees in along there?
Sure, okay, sure. And I think you're right, there's a huge amount of open space. And again, I guess this is in the perspective building. The entire distance from the front to the back of our project is right here. You could almost place that project twice in place before you get to the first single-family homes. Again, we get over there and we think, wow, this is right on top. There's an enormous distance. Again, this project could be placed almost twice in between this location. There are front yards here. These front yards, when the undergrounding of utilities occur, large street trees are planned to be planted there, so that's going to create one of these layers to take full advantage of that will now occur. We'll be taking full advantage of the space that we have here, and we have that. This space right here is currently established for two purposes. One is for the setbacks that you've been concerned about, things that allow future expansion, future construction, and for construction access so that if anything needs to happen here or it needs to be expanded, the Caltrain, Samtrans folks have access to this area to do construction from, so they could get vehicles and things like that. Certainly at some point, if this changed and and that changed, there is the opportunity that could be converted to an area that if landscaping was being lost here, landscaping might be able to be introduced there. But in the interim, it's being preserved for those purposes.
And there's no way to put a layer of trees in between those two that wouldn't get lost, in between the gray and the yellow?
You mean along this dotted line?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to.
I don't know the.
Mr. Chairman, the reason that yellow is there is for emergency service vehicles, and the fire department requires a 20-foot area so they can drive their trucks and get their equipment back there. That's why it's there.
It's also a no-build zone that was worked out between the landlord and the leasee, which is Legacy Partners, because we both have to build a project at some point. And most people, probably don't believe this, but we actually spent a lot of time negotiating with them up front how they would build their railroad and what impacts they might have on the neighborhood and us, and trying to avoid impacts on the neighborhood. That area is set aside for them to build their railroad from.
Right, but what I'm trying to get at is...
So there's no way to put a tree there because they can't have their construction equipment running it over. I mean, if there was no emergency EVA lane, emergency vehicle access, and there was no need to build a railroad, then you could put trees in there.
Then why wouldn't you put more...
we can't use Old County Road, so we've got to use that yellow area.
Okay, then why wouldn't you put more trees on the berm in the front here? I mean, it looks like...
I spent personally 6 months with the engineers from Caltrain trying to figure out where they could where we could plant trees at our expense on their berm. And I'm happy to plant as many as they'll allow us to plant. The problem is that their business is running a railroad and they have to do it safely. And so they have switches along the tracks that they run from each direction so they can see. That gives them a visual notice of what's ahead, bends in the road, whether there's things at the station or not. And the more trees you plant, the shorter the distances that they can see those switches, and it gives them less time to actually react.
I'm not arguing. I'm saying if you put a tree in between every one of those trees, you would cover a lot more space, and you're not going to impact the switches any more than the existing tree.
That's something that we could ask, we could do some follow-up on between now and when we're done with this, we'll have plenty of time to do follow-up on that. I'll be assured, if it was possible to put a tree in between each and every one of these trees, we have no problem doing that. It is inconsequential in the scheme of this thing. I think that there is one thing that happened. I think there is one thing that happens here is that our landscape architect tends to take these and show them in an earlier stage of maturity versus full maturity, and he thinks about the long life cycle of these trees. And one of the things that we have happened, and I could take you, any of you who came down to our property that we went to that's next to the train in San Jose about 6 years ago, and it was 3 years old at that time, we'd gone along and done a tree planting scheme. The city wanted us to do it much denser. The landscape architect said, it's going to grow too thick, too dense, and we're going to wind up cutting half the trees out. We're right at that point where we need to do that at year 9. So he's depicted trees maybe at 10 years of maturity, but these are trees that by the time they get to a bigger range of maturity, they're going to start to squish together, and then you look at the health of the tree. But I don't care. I'm happy to plant them twice as close together if that's possible. And I suspect that like in this zone here, that's probably something in there's possible. And if it's not these trees, maybe there's something else that we could say that's more short-term natured, that when these trees get big enough that you could remove. We really don't have objections to that. These are just indications of where you could plant trees. The other thing is we don't want to overstate it by, showing them all there and not be able to see the building and, try and mask what the building is. The building is there, and it's an attractive building, and we'll landscape it as best we can.
So, Deborah, can we modify this or talk about modifying this improvement measure to include provide landscape screening to the greatest extent possible? I don't know if I actually see those words in here, okay? Because it seems like the developer is willing to do that, and I think that sort of, to me, makes up for the visual impact of losing the hill. If you gain an urban forest and you lose a view of a hill, from my perspective, it's a reasonable trade-off. Plus, the city gets additional trees out of it, and so that's a win for the city. Now, I see some individuals in the audience that would like to speak.
I'm here if there's any other questions.
Thank you for your response.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, is it okay while he's doing that, just to be efficient? So this is definitely something we're interested in. We have had some conversations with the legacy folks and the Samtrans folks about doing this. One definite concern for us is that mega gap in the middle. So we have to find a way to deal with that, because that's totally not going to work if we have this gigantic area of bald space. But with that considered, while we still stand strong on this issue of reducing the height and the density, we think that this is an important area in category number 2 that I talked about earlier, which is impact mitigation. This is very important, and I would agree with Commissioner Marsters, who mentioned that this is a trade-off that would be valuable for the neighborhood in the sense that an urban forest is something we're kind of looking to do all the way around Greater East San Carlos. We know that we're the only game in town, and we're going to be working with you guys for years for development stuff because it's the only place anyone seems to build anything around here. And as a result, we get it. Life has to go on. There has to be progress. And so we think that having that, like the 65-foot sign that somehow got put in. We want you guys to negotiate better, of course, but we believe that the green belt that Dimitri originally coined and we've all been talking about for years is a great way to move forward as part of our urban, suburban reality that we're going to be living in. So, and we do want to talk with you, Jeff, and others during our negotiations about how we can get the details on the trees. Now, I want to state unequivocally that there's a concern that when high-speed rail comes in, if and when it comes in, and by the way, Commissioner Silverman, I really appreciated your comment on Old County Road. I think that was I know you guys have punted on big one, height and density, but the little details you did make, those are important. And so when we do finally talk with these guys about the trees and the height and density, we think that there is still that issue when high-speed rail comes through that they're going to blow away probably 70% of these trees. But, at least this gives us, 15 years of trees or something. And if we can strategically place these trees in the best possible position so that even when high-speed rail comes through, at least the ones on the east side of Old County Road from East Side Connect, those will be fully grown in. And perhaps, maybe in the yellow, or I guess if that's emergency vehicle, at least somewhere along that backside, maybe, let me point to these little areas, like this area up here, that area, but maybe there's a way to just create a continuous layer of green that exists between our neighborhood and these guys, even in the event that high-speed rail blows out 70% of the trees, which no one can predict with any level of accuracy. The legacy guys can't, we can't, nobody really knows. That is the best type of solution, and we're not going to be perfect here, but this is definitely a move in the right direction, so thank you.
So hi. Is this no, this isn't a stick. I wanted to, unfortunately there's only VGA here. Oh, you have a stick? Yeah, I actually wanted to display some of the pictures.
Do you want to take a second and load those on there? And while you're doing that, I have a question for Brian, if you're willing to answer it. Or can attempt to answer it. So, go ahead, come on up while he's doing that. So that there are several questions that I have, and those are the concern that high-speed rail is going to take all of these trees and remove them, okay? And in a sense, we've created an urban forest that we're just going to cut down in a little while. And so what happens is we create an urban forest to get the project put in place, but then it comes along and there's nothing there, and now it just becomes everybody's worst nightmare, okay? Because they've predicted all along that this is what was going to happen. So how do we ensure that these trees that we plant are going to stay there?
I think there are a couple of questions or a couple of things that need to be made there. First of all is, right now nobody thinks that high-speed rail is even going to be built until 2029. I mean, that's their target date. It's an unfunded project. They haven't even begun to start studying it, so nobody even knows what it might look like as of right now officially. So I think the first question that we ask is, when there's a potential project that is out there, do we try to do the best now, today, to make something that works for the scenario that works today and for the near future? And I think that's the first question we have to ask. So do we do nothing in the thought that something may happen in 2029? My argument would be, let's do something that's the best for the neighborhood and for everybody now. Secondly, we don't know, and I don't think I think anybody who'd tell you what they think high-speed rail would look like out here would be lying, because I don't think anybody knows. But I do think that what Ben was saying made sense. I think the city's made some great strides on their East Side Connect project, creating the opportunity to put trees up there. I remember walking that area with Jesse some time ago, looking and seeing there were no places to put trees. What the city's doing is now allowing an extra row of trees, of this 4-row of tree concept. Secondly, I think some of the concepts that Ben was saying, what can we tuck in near the building that Legacy has tried to do? We know those things will be safe. Anything on the other side of the yellow will be safe. And obviously trying to guess, where we could best put these, I think are our best options. But I would say that, the strategies I would employ would be, let's make it as good as possible now and not create something that's poor because we speculate something might happen. I would try to put put as many trees as we can in as many places that we know just won't be hit, like the other side of Old County Road, and as much as can happen along the building, like Legacy's already tried to do. I think those are the strategies to be employed.
Okay, thank you.
It's a PDF. Yeah. Excuse me? It says DVEIR. It starts. So while he's looking to put that document so we can project. So a couple of points I'd like to make. It's important to understand the context of history and the context of history of the berm, and as a long time resident of San Carlos and someone who lived through the entire process of.
Can I interrupt you just for a second?
Yeah.
So what are we on right now? What are we talking about right now?
We're still talking about visual quality.
So we're talking about visual quality right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So and my comments speak to that. Well, let me start with that. Let me start with the view part of the comments I have. So I feel that in the discussion between Ms. Steinmetz and Mr. Kay, in the discussions that you guys were having, trying to get some clarity about views, loss of views, all that kind of good stuff, that's my draft EIR feedback. I hope you guys have looked at that. I provided it in, it's pretty serious here, and it was very disappointing to see the level of detail that I provided, frankly ignored in the EIR, citing noise elements from the city plan, citing land uses. We do have a sensitive land use, but I don't want to digress. I want to just focus on the views, okay? Because I could spend an hour on that, because we did not close on noise. I want to make sure that we're aware of that. So we'll just have to scroll. Speed this up a little bit. Okay. So when we speak about views, when residents of the East Side talk about the loss of views, the feedback that we receive is, well, that's not significant because you're discussing your personal view. And at no point in time have I ever discussed a personal view. Discussed community views. So there was an important clarification that I think was made, was that what's significant under CEQA is something that's a loss of the community. And it has to be something of significance. I heard a rock outcropping is one example of something that's significant. The Pulgus Ridge is a well-known hill that we will lose. If a rock outcropping is considered significant, I would think the loss of the Pulgus Ridge would be considered significant. When we talk about the community, we're talking about people driving along Industrial, we're talking about people driving along Old County Road, we're talking about all of the east-west streets that go from Industrial up to and across El Camino. And there'll be a significant loss of those views of the West Side Hills. So that's a community impact, that's not an individual impact. I think it's also, I think it was interesting to note that the lawyers, I think, were both conflating individual property issues with these community issues. And I would argue that there was significant confusion within that discussion that there wasn't closure on the term significance. I heard that there are definitions of significance, but I did not hear them defined during the course of that discussion. I think that's important to note, and I think it's important as a planning commission that you guys clearly understand what that actually means, so we can actually close on that issue. So here are some views, and here's something that's a community, something that will be impacted by the community. This is actually a view from the train station itself. One would argue that the train station is not east side or west side. It is something that's part of San Carlos. Views of the Pulgas Ridge and the other hills will be lost. Okay, here's how I scroll. Here's a view of from one of the streets. So we're talking about a view corridor that would exist. I don't know what street this is. A view corridor that would exist here. Is that Sylvan? Okay, so there's this is what's preserved. This is what's not preserved. When we talk about the berm, one of the folks representing the development company was saying how significant the berm is to the views. You can see the berm right here, and you can see the hills right here. I don't consider the berm to be significant at all, but now we're going to add another 50 feet on top of that. And from this far point down on the street, you'll either lose the hillside entirely or 90% of it. So I don't see how that is viewed as insignificant. And again, this is a public street. The public will have lost that. This is the experience of living in East San Carlos. That will be altered forever. So it's important to note that. And it's fine if you make that decision to do so, but let's call a spade a spade. This is significant.
Mr. Marsters, I don't want to cut him off, and I want to hear what he has to say, but I would just observe that there are 90 pages dedicated in the final EIR to his comments, including all of these pictures, and I've read it. I'm sure that most of us have read it. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting.
I just wanted to make sure that So and I'm actually very sensitive to that because a number of speakers got up who were not invited to get up and spoke for over half an hour. So I'm a little concerned that if you want to just cut me off.
I can't cut anybody off. I'm just saying.
Okay, I've read Feel free to cut me off if you want to. Are you cutting me off officially?
It would be Mr. Marsters who controls the meeting. I'm just observing that. I mean, I've read the final EIR.
Well, I just wanted to make this point because what you're hearing is a utterly biased view of what the impacts are from my perspective. And this is just a picture. So a picture. These pictures are, they tell the story more than what I would say or what any other individual would say. So that's enough of the pictures since you've seen them. Yes, I would mind, and I would like to finish my point. Okay, so again, conflation of views. We didn't have closure. Old County Road improvement is a separate project. So if we're gonna talk about the Old County Road improvements in the context of this, how can we not talk about the multimodal station? That's a point that I want to make.
Dimitri, before you leave this picture, this is a northward picture looking north, and because I recognize the house, and so this view here will not be impacted.
It won't be impacted, or
It will not be impacted at all.
I have no idea.
Yeah, from northwood,
No,
it will not
there's
be
no building
impacted.
That's wonderful. Okay, so Old County Road improvements, conflation about trees that are on the street view. I want to be very, very careful about that. We're talking about the impacts of the buildings. So now there's been a conflation of trees with the impacts of the buildings. And I think that was, I want to make sure that everyone's clear on that. So visuals for the community, east to west, I talked about that. One other thing that came up as a topic of discussion is that there's 30 feet or 20 feet that's required for the emergency vehicles. And if HSR comes out and blows that out, there's still going to be 20 to 30 feet required for emergency vehicles for the building, and that hasn't been discussed. So do you understand the point that I'm making? If what's left of Samtrans's right-of-way property is used up by HSR, then there won't be any room for emergency vehicles.
That's why we had the discussion about making Old County Road essentially inviolate.
Right.
And that means they have to leave enough property, or they will have to tear down a building, or, something.
Yeah, I just
But
wanted to
the
make
idea
sure
is
that was clear.
The idea is that we will protect the city from that occurring.
And the last point I wanted to make was...
Because of the project.
Because of the project.
Because of the project.
The last-
Obviously, there's a possibility that, well, I don't need to get into it.
The last point I wanted to make was about history. And as I started the discussion before Mr. Silberman, you were questioning the point. Samtrans, we have a history of Samtrans behavior and Samtrans's sense of responsibility to the community. And we were promised significant landscaping along the berm. I think anyone who takes a look at the berm could say that much of that never happened, that there has been no irrigation system, nothing to allow for these trees to reach any kind of level of maturity that makes sense. So if you guys go ahead and decide to approve this project, what's important, what I think would be an important mitigation factor is to make sure that Samtrans actually takes the responsibility to make sure that the landscaping actually does occur, and that these trees have a chance to actually live, because that did not occur.
That did not occur, and actually I've had some discussions with Al as to who is actually responsible for that landscaping.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out from our discussion that the city is actually responsible for the landscaping on the berm, and that Samtrans is actually responsible for the landscaping on the flat portion of the land between El Camino and the berm.
So then, I guess the city did not uphold its end of the
from my
line.
perspective, both of them failed you. Okay, just being honest.
Okay.
And so that needs to be rectified as part of this.
And one final point is this: I felt that the discussion is a learning moment for everyone. The discussion simply between the two lawyers about what's significant, what isn't significant, about CEQA and all that is a very small microcosm, say about 0.05% of what the East Side community has met in terms of trying to get a straight answer for any one of the many issues that we have spoken to, because it's that old who's on first routine that the comedy team had, Abbott and Costello, where the one guy gets utterly frustrated because of the names. When we've tried to get information, it's, oh, go talk to them, oh, go talk to these guys, oh, go talk to these guys, oh, go talk to these guys. So it's just, I just bring this up because I think it's important to note just how difficult it has been for us as a community group to meet with 5 years of stonewalling on the part of the development team and Samtrans to have no discussions whatsoever. We could have, I think, hopefully have had some mitigations in place before it even went before the board. So that's deeply disappointing to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. That's pretty much visual quality. And what I'm going to do now and sort of as a way to move this along, I'm going to lump everything else, okay, together, okay, so that anybody that wants to talk about air quality, cultural resources, biological resources, geology and soils, hydrology, population, employment and housing, public services, and utilities can talk about all of those things in the next section here. And then we're going to leave sort of other issues and concerns for the last. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me if it makes sense to everybody.
Does that? Okay, so we're essentially going to talk about all the other things that are in the EIR. Please. No, it is not. The plan at the moment is to finish up what we can tonight. If we require another meeting on November 4th, we will continue it to November 4th. But the idea is that we would actually take a vote on it on November 18th when we are a full commission again. And I need to make sure that the other commissioners are going to be here on November 18th. 19th?
The 19th is a Monday.
So it's 5th, November 5th is the next meeting. Okay, so November 19th.
I'm sorry, I'm going to be here, but so the plan is to take this up at 2 more meetings?
If we need the intermediate meeting to continue on, yes. If not, we will continue on to the 19th when we will have a full commission. Okay?
Yes,
Right now,
I'm
we only
available
have
on the
about
19th.
another hour, so.
November 19th. Are you available on the 19th? Okay.
That's a
I just
regular
want to make sure.
scheduled-
That's a regular scheduled meeting.
Also Thanksgiving week, though.
It's Thanksgiving week. Okay, but it's the Monday of Thanksgiving week.
I'm still going to be here.
You're still going to be here. Okay.
Can someone put on the board the full list of things we're about to cover, just so that there's a slide up there so we can refer to that? You just mentioned a whole bunch of things.
Up and right there. Okay? So I'm going to run through I'm going to start with Fang Wei, and then I'll go back through the list again.
So actually a quick question because again I'm new here. So on the vote, is it like half of the commissioners have to approve, or is like one objection means rejection thing, or is have to all agree?
Let me tell you my understanding, and then staff can correct me if I'm wrong. We have 3 options. Okay, this is the environmental impact report. Okay, this is not approving a project. This is essentially saying we agree or disagree with
what the report says.
What the report says. Okay, so we can either say no, we don't agree, and it has to go back to staff for more study. We can say yeah, we agree with the report, and we send it on to the city council. There's also sort of this intermediate stage where we can say, yes, we agree with it, but we would like to see these improvement measures added in as a potential condition of approval.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Okay, that's very clear. Thank you.
But we're not approving the project tonight.
Okay.
Or
Okay. Not
even,
voting on it.
we're not voting on it, and we won't even be voting on the EIR until the 19th.
But again, still very quick. So if we say no, means like 3 of you say no and 2 of you say yes, or?
If we say no, what happens, if we say no,
Like
it still
everyone
goes
is
to
no.
the city council with a recommendation of no from the planning commission, unless we actually send it back to staff for additional studies.
Okay, so I make it more clear. So
A negative
does
vote
that
doesn't
mean-
stop it.
Actually, what I mean is, how many people I have
3
to
of 5.
convince?
3 of 5.
3 out of
A
5.
majority.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I should have make that clear. So first, I want to comment about visual and follow up on the previous speaker. I think what he says is, I totally agree with what he says, and I also want to respond to, because that's also my understanding, because final EIR, we keep going back to say that final EIR covers that, covers this, covers that, but that's why we have this meeting, right? Because we want to correct and point out what's missing in the final EIR. So even though final EIR says already have an item, but we still want to comment on that because we feel that the statement in final EIR is incorrect or missing something, right? So what we said here, well, most of these comments should still in record, because it doesn't mean final EIR already says so, doesn't mean we cannot comment on it. We can still say this is incorrect based on our research or opinions. So I want to go back to visual. I remember when I first standing here, I was expecting a baby, and now he is 3 months old. We're super happy. But I just have to share. Thank you. But I just have to share this very sad experience with me and my babies. Just every time I walk on Old County Street, it's supposed to be a very happy family time. But every time I look on my right, I just have to tell my baby, says, "Oh, we are not going to see this view anymore in a few years." I know this is not going to change anything, but just want to share this and also point out that when we discuss view, doesn't really mean like, okay, the back of the community can have the view, so it is okay. No, that means we need to maintain the view on the front row of the community, which means the residents right next to Old Counties. So all this, like, we cannot say, oh, it's not blocking the view 3 buildings back, so it's okay. We have to maintain visibilities to all the residents. And as the previous previous speaker says, our view is basically the hill. So if we're talking about calculating percentage, blocking the hill is a 100% blocking the view. So I believe in any standard, that means significant. I cannot see why 100% is not significant. And quickly comments on the architect replies. What I see there is, like, because all these restrictions and no building zones, what I feel is that this is just not going to work because of all this. We just cannot build. There's so many restrictions, and current plan doesn't fit within that narrow space and with all the restrictions. We need to go back to drawing board, downsize the project, downsize the capacity, and redesign the landscape, so we don't have to have all these workarounds. We can just fit, not try to find find little space to improve and struggle to feed this project. And okay, finally, I don't even know this is fit into any category, but I do it anyway. So I hope this will help. Is we all, like from the beginning of the day, I'm sure you ask yourself too, that who will live there? And if I ask any of you, do you want to live there? We all know the answers. But we are blind by the big check that government promised for us. We either hate it because think it's a is like some kind of get rich quick scam, or we love it because it's going to bring so many money into the city. But how about? So I just want to know this from a more objective view. So I do this research. I basically just go to social events on the street and ask people, show them that okay, San Carlos is going to have this project. We're going to build an apartment there. Well, if you are going to move in the near future and there's an apartment there, given the current condition and your finance situation are all okay, will you live there? So here's my survey. Okay, and this is not like simulations, not report. It's not simulation running just numbers. It's not some report that compared San Carlos to some city which is not even similar to San Carlos. The result is very interesting and yet not surprising. Quickly about the report, I sampled some 25 to 35 years old people, which I assume is our target customer, and employer ranging from Genentech, which is the biggest pharmaceutical company here, Apple, Facebook, Google, DreamWorks, which is the movie company here, and a couple smaller high-tech company, some hospitals and some law firms, and some unemployed people. I'll get to that later. The result is not surprising. I interviewed 52 people. Only one person replied yes. That means 98.08% of people who doesn't willing to live in that place. And if we only consider full-time people who has full-time employee, there's 100% says no. And I happen to, so in the back of this is, I happen to have to do some home improvement in October 21, so I take my chance to talk to people in front of Home Depot parking lot, and I ask a couple of people, and they're ask the same question, and they say no, and but there's one reply say yes. And on my way to my work, there is a homeless people living in Rail City Caltrain station, who is a very nice guy. His name is Thomas. So I talked to him, asked the same question, and surprisingly, he says no, because the Caltrain is too loud. He wouldn't want to live there if he get given this situation. So and there's very quick. There's a couple comments. I won't go through all of them, but I think the comments that I found the most significant is, given all the other options, Belmont, Railway Shore, Foster City, why all these options, why live in San Carlos in that condition? So I brought this up just because I think that we've been talking about environment, but we haven't really, and what led to this is just, this is going to be some, if this is not the people who we want to invite to our cities, or if we want, the people we want to invite is that one person from in front of Home Depot parking lot, that we are on the right track. But if those people who work in the biotech company, high-tech company, we need to do better to attract them. Thank you.
Thank you. Bonnie, would you like to add anything? Please.
I guess I'll be like David and put my other hat on. This is not a Sierra Club hat. This is a residential design review question. After 13 years on that committee, I have never remembered, and I hope Deborah will help me out here, anything about the view of that little pimple of a hill that's above Arguello Park being a great view that has to be preserved. We only have two things in the city that are view important things that are asked to be parts of when the designs are done and the neighbors will complain. The views are of the bay and of the western hills, and the western hills are the up Crestview and going into Hallmark and down, and not that little hill above Arguello Park. And if anybody thinks I'm degrading that little hill, I live on that little hill, but I mean, it's not the western hills. And that's just always been the requirement that we've had to preserve views, those two views, Bay and the western hills.
Thank you. I don't see Mark here, so we'll move on to Sam. He's gone. Okay, we'll move on. David.
Okay, this is David Krebs Architect's hat, not Sierra Club. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Let me see, I'm trying to get my thoughts together here. Well, one thing I was kind of noticing is, don't you see the potential conflict between preserving the views and putting a lot of landscaping along the berm? If you're putting redwood trees along the berm, the view's going to go away anyway. And there may be two stages. You know, if you can't preserve the views, then you plant trees. Frank Lloyd Wright said that. You plant vines to hide your building, whatever. But it sounds like there's an inherent conflict there because those trees that are on the berm could in fact grow high enough to block the building, which then also means they block the hill. So just kind of clarify that there's an inherent conflict there.
The idea is. The first thing is that if that were the case, they could have planted the trees 10 years ago, the trees would be in place, and it wouldn't be a problem. You wouldn't even see the hill, okay? And the trees are not really a conflict. They're attempting to replace what they have already, which is a view of trees on a hillside, and instead of them replacing that view with a view of the buildings, which, being an architect, I'm sure you find nice, but for some people, views of buildings are not their preferred choice of views. So the alternative would be replacing that view with essentially what they had before, which is trees. It may not be on a hillside, but it would be trees.
Right. I'm all in favor of planting trees along the berm, but I'm just kind of seeing, like as you said, if you had planted trees and they had grown up, you wouldn't have the view of the hill, and that's the big controversy that we're kind of going around here already. So it's kind of coming full circle.
Yeah.
So and the other thing, I mean, we've got a piece of property that went through a general plan, was zoned for medium density housing, 50-foot height limit, and now we're kind of, it seems to me that if we were to preserve the views 100%, which what I'm kind of hearing from the east side, is that the only way you could do that is have two-story buildings. Even a three-story building, which I've heard could be potentially acceptable, will block the views of that hill. And so I just, to clarify the situation, either you're going high density, which is part of the general plan, which was the original intent, which makes a transit-oriented development, or you do two-story along there, and it's not a transit-oriented development anymore. It's not enough density to do it. So, I'm just trying to clarify it. I'm not necessarily taking a position on it, but just those are kind of the things you're trying to balance off here. But just be aware that the general plan visualize that as high-density, tall buildings. I mean, that's what's in there.
That's why I've suggested the idea of keeping the 4 stories and putting the trees in front of it.
Yeah.
Sort of solves both problems.
Except for the view problem. But
We're working on it.
yeah. And again, going back to that sketch that I did way back when, those were 2-story and 3 stories as seen from the east side. Only place we had 4 stories was on El Camino on one wing of those buildings. And, so there may be an alternative architecturally to reduce the height and do it. And I also like the idea of putting housing in the central area instead of the offices. That might be a good way to balance that off as a compromise. If you take some of the housing off the north end and move it to the center. I don't know what the economics of that is because the developer is losing, so many square feet of office building there. So anyway, that's all.
And I just wanted to say thank you for that alternative. I think that actually drove some major discussion on the project. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Okay, the next one is Dimitri. Again. Here. Here.
Mr. Marshers, you had a list of the other topics. Was the intent to try to cover them, or can we talk about other?
I'm just trying to get through more of the items that are here tonight. I realize that we may come back on November 4th for some last items, but...
So I wanted to talk about sound a little bit. Just very quickly.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that the points I made earlier were understood. So the sound study that came out, you all heard that the sound guy basically said, well, I didn't want to include the horns, I didn't want to include the squeaks from the noise, I didn't want to do the sound of the trains entering or leaving from the platform, which was actually one of the requests I had because there's a ratio of significance to calling an area impacted depending on the level of noise that exists. But even with the paucity of data that was provided in the redone sound study, there was a 50-foot non-reflective and a 50-foot reflective measurements. And the differences between those, and this is what's very important to understand about decibels. When you're at those levels that are in the high 80s and 90s, we're talking about power and amplitude ratios that are exponential. So you can say, oh, the difference between 88, for example, which is an average of the non-reflective measurements, compared to 90, which was average of the reflective. It's only 2 dB, or potentially slightly under 2 dB. It doesn't mean that much. We're talking about the difference between 60 dB in terms of amplitude is 1,000. 90 dB is 31,620. So each dB as you go up the scale, when you're in the 80s and 90s, going up another dB is very significant. It's the kind of thing that can crack your eardrums open. So I just wanted to make sure that point was heard and understood, and that I think that there's significantly more information and clarity needed on sound. And that's the only point I'm going to make.
Ben.
Just a quick general comment. I want to say that I've been going to these planning commissions for quite a long time, and I remember back in the day when we'd get up and talk, and we would just feel like we were pariah, and that we were not good enough to even be listened to. We did not deserve to be here, and I did not feel that way with you guys. I think that you guys are being thoughtful about this, and I heard some thoughtful ideas, and so I want to give you some positive encouragement and say that is appreciated. And I think that everybody knows that San Carlos kind of has that reputation as an old boys network that just does whatever, the staff recommends and the city council recommends. And we've had that legacy of having our neighborhood, continually lose every battle, and we're not going to put up with that anymore. And really now the situation comes down to, are we going to find a solution that we can all be happy with? And this is going to relate to cultural resources, I promise. Or are we going to be in some protracted legal type situation with one side or the other side doing something that, basically creates a huge problem for everyone and gives a lot of work to the folks at the table here. I really don't want to get to that point. I'd love to get to a point where we can all work this out pragmatically. And that was not meant as a threat, by the way. It's just meant as an encouragement for us all to work together. So one of the areas that we're now talking about is cultural resources and public services. And that is one of those areas where we can deal with area number 3, extrinsic mitigation. So this isn't specifically about putting trees in or about, whether, like David Krabbe saying that the view is there or not there. This is about what is in it for the people who are impacted, us. And so one of the ideas we had mentioned and we've been talking about throwing around with Jeff Bird and Jess Couch and the guys and Brian is this idea of a public swimming pool. So we know that we see that the view of the pool that they're going to be getting. We're really not just interested in Greater East San Carlos. I know probably everyone thinks that. We actually care about all of San Carlos. And San Carlos doesn't have a pool. And the legacy of you guys is to do cool services around here that accrue or inure benefit in conjunction with new projects. And so this is an opportunity to reroute some of Jeff Bird's money. Jeff Bird is already, you've already graciously offered the money you're already giving for these projects. And Jeff, who knows, he might throw in a little more. He's
a diving board or something, yeah.
Yeah, he might be willing to help a little more, but we're not going to talk for him. But
he's putting a pool in all our houses.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. No, I don't mean that. But this is one possibility, is what can we put in San Carlos that's cool for everyone, that's going to make everybody support this project? Now, everybody knows about the Walk of Shame down Old County Road, and thanks to Al's $4 million or whatever it was that Al raised when he went to Sacramento that day, and Deborah Nelson, we're going to be dealing with that issue on Old County Road, the Walk of Shame, this horrific thing that Parviz had to leave behind when the berm got built. So that's going to be addressed. Now we have this sort of concurrent Walk of Shame into Loyola Park. I mean, if anybody's cruised by that green van that always is sitting there in that parking lot, you probably know what I'm talking about. What is this thing? And we have these random one-story shacks where I guess there's community meetings going on, and I have nothing against it. I think that's great to have those things, but the spaces are incredibly unattractive, and it would be great if the city would put into its parks and master rec plan, and it's already in that plan, to convert these into something that goes into Loyola Park. So part of what we're talking about for public services right now, I don't see anything. I mean, it's a big zero. So how do we go from a total goose egg, which gives nothing to San Carlos and nothing to us, and solve the WIFM equation, what's in it for me equation, and me meaning all of San Carlos. And so we're trying to find out specifics about what you guys are going to recommend here. This is up to you to put something in this for us in terms of extrinsic mitigation, public services, and everything else, or are we just intended to talk about this thing and the same old nothing is going to happen? So I put it on you guys. What can we do for us specifically in terms of area number 3? I know that we're saying that there's no significant adverse impacts, and of course there's nothing bad happening to our neighbor with this thing. We've proven that time and time again. We split hairs legally that of course there's no significant adverse impacts, but even though there's no significant adverse impacts, as we say, what can we do for us, because we feel there must be? Thank you.
It occurs to me that there are all of these conversations going on, and at some point, I think before this group sort of makes a decision about the EIR, are we going to get an update on what's going on between the different groups?
We can give you an update this evening.
That would be great, because I keep hearing bits and pieces of things and ideas and, and that we sort of as a commission haven't really been privy to in any way. And so as much as possible, it would be nice if we were updated either tonight or in a memo, something.
I can briefly update you and tell you what I can tell you at this point.
Okay.
Basically, we're having stakeholder meetings between the City of San Carlos, the GSC board, Samtrans, and the developer, and they're meetings of just these stakeholders. We've had 3 meetings so far. We're going to have another one on November 5th, I believe, or something like that, 6th. So we have a facilitator facilitating these meetings. It's more of a mediation, and we are trying to come to terms with some of the issues that the GSC is interested in, and some what is referred to as by Mr. Fullers as extrinsic mitigations. However, they don't. I mean, there's somewhat of a tie-in to CEQA in that some of the discussions that have been had at this meeting have answered some of the questions that are coming up in that meeting, like toxics. How is that dealt with? That was discussed here, and we believe that there's agreement that that is sufficient. But I can't talk about the specific issues, as we've all agreed that it's in the best interest of all the stakeholders to be confidential, because it's a negotiation. And so it's ongoing. It's going on for perhaps longer than anybody expected it to, and we will continue it for as long as we need to and want to, everybody. But I think that we're making some pretty good progress in these meetings. But again, from a staff perspective, that should not affect, while I see that there's somewhat of a nexus there, that shouldn't affect the Planning Commission's decision-making process on the CEQA document.
I want to make sure that the other commissioners are aware that that's going on.
Yes.
It keeps getting alluded to, but I just, I want to make sure that everybody understands that that's going on at the same time in a different.
Excellent.
And Brian, sorry to make you wait so long, but come on up to the microphone.
Angela, you're still with us?
I am still with you.
Excellent.
Any questions? Let's wait till after Brian.
This is on what we have been talking about, the height, et cetera. Just real quick, some observations. I agree with the gentleman that was from the Sierra Club. I think he had some ideas. I took a look at them for lowering the buildings and making possibly the city. I think was discussing that they wanted to get $150,000 from this development, right, for income. I would try to focus more on then the tax base is going to give that is going to be the businesses, and not necessarily people that are renting or buying these facilities, the homes, townhouses. So as far as San Carlos, because I've been here 24 years, I love San Carlos. My family has been raised here. I spent a lot of time in this facility for other reasons, but more social support. I just don't want to see San Carlos go by the way of Stockton, Mammoth Lakes, Boise County, Jefferson County, all who adopted these high-density housing all are facing bankruptcy, because after they have done that, a lot of they couldn't support the infrastructure. It just was overlooked after the developer came and went. Just real briefly on trees, I saw the trees, the pictures of the trees. I remember I sat here, you guys brought in a specialist on the sound expert, and some people were asking what would be the best trees if you're going to consider the trees. He said broad-based leaves, and not narrow like maybe pine trees would be probably a narrow kind of thing. And I think they also disrupt the ground quite a bit. If you look around our neighborhood where pine trees are at, that's where all the little sidewalks are all painted red because they're all cracked and have to be replaced a couple of years. Regarding the little pimple, the hill over there that I look at when I come here, and I say, oh, I'm here in San Carlos. As far as obstructions and getting the approval, there was a house built kind of kitty-corner to me. The city planners forced them to send out a document that I had to assign to agree because it was a two-story house that was going to overlook into my yard. I had to agree to that, so I actually had to sign a document. All the people in the area that was affected by that had to agree to it. In this case here, the game is to just rezone one area to another area, and then we can go and apply a rule here that's different from a different zoning area. Another example is when I was upgrading my house, I was putting a little sunroom in the back. The city came down and said, well, you got to have a 4x4 skylight in your kitchen because it blocked the view of the sun. That cost me thousands of dollars to put that in just so I could put this extension on. But that's all I really have to say as far as rules and regulations when it comes to the height. I have kind of a major issue here on the environmental side. Sure. There's been a lot of history here. This is essentially regarding the greenhouse emissions, CO2 increases, et cetera, and it pertains to the climate program we have here in San Carlos. The history goes back to AB 32 that was signed in June 1st, 2005. And it essentially was signed in by Schwarzenegger to reduce emissions to 2000 levels by 2010, and it goes on and on. And then San Carlos funded a greenhouse inventory report. A lot of cities decided to find out how much greenhouse, where is it being emitted, and how do we mitigate these things. So San Carlos funded this report. Okay, spent lots of money, I'm sure, on this. And that report, it says 53% of the greenhouse emission is in the transportation sector as a result of highway travel. Basically 101, that was the majority of it. I put together a pie chart that's in there just to kind of give you a visual view of that report. Essentially, this is the freeway, and this is industrial and commercial police cars driving around the city, okay? And the rest of it is us, okay? Then in May 2008, the city of San Carlos sent a climate protection letter, which I have a copy here signed by a lot of you folks here and the mayor at the time, saying, yeah, we want to be part of this thing. And what that did eventually integrated the CAP program in with your city planning. And you were talking about, well, we have the city plan, but somebody else is saying, well, it's complicated and et cetera. We are going to do zoning and other things. Well, by doing this, it supersedes, I believe, I'm not a lawyer or anything, but I believe it supersedes our city plan for low-density housing, medium housing, any of those kind of things. So I'd go back and look at that. Then, 2009, the city put the plan in place right here. This is our climate action plan, and this is where, we're going to, again, this pie chart comes back up again. It's put in now in writing in our city plan, the reduction of greenhouse gases, et cetera, and all the rules and regulations for mitigating it, et cetera, came into play. So essentially, in the climate action plan, it's part of the overall charter. It says it has a goal of bringing San Carlos greenhouse emissions levels to 15% below 2005 levels by 2020 and 35 below 2035 levels by 2030. Which we have now coming from here. Permits are changed. My neighbor, for example, just to give it, wanted to put an extension on her house, do some additions. This thing here, because of you had to have special contractors that were trained on how to implement these kind of designs. It cost 25% more for this addition, almost like overnight. And she decided it was just too expensive to put it in. So this local economic opportunities for, I know, developers and contractors that were local to San Carlos that just didn't have a job anymore for that particular project. So what's the city do? Well, if the goal is to reduce CO2, and we know by a lot of expensive analysis by specialists that the transportation area is bringing in the majority of the CO2. What I don't understand is how the In-N-Out Burger got approved, because it essentially brings in, I did a little bit of research on this, they serve approximately 1,250 burgers a day on average. That's approximately 450,000 burgers per year. I'm guessing 200 to 300,000 cars probably coming off the freeway, idling, waiting through the line. That's why they have those guys taking orders, in the queue, because they just sit there and burn gas. So how much are we adding? Huh? What?
You've been there before.
I've never been there before.
I have.
Hey, Trent.
But you walk there, right? Yeah.
So anyway, the question is, and I'm going to lead up to something here, is how much CO2 is that place producing, and how much is it adding to our charter, the city charter goal of reducing it 15% by 2020? Does it mean anything? Just having all these rules and regulations, does it mean that they can go ahead and come to our house when we want to do some kind of improvement and say, well, we've got these environmental rules now, you've got to do this and that, and you have to have green this and that, but we can go ahead and do this kind of thing. So then, now what we're doing is that we're talking about the Transit Village. We all know 667 parking spots. They're going to have thousands of people, 38,000 square feet of building space. They've got to park someplace coming in from all directions. Again, going back to the goals that the city put into action, how much more is it going to increase our CO2 in San Carlos? Now, I went and looked at the EIR. In the section 1 on page 3, it says, project would not include all reduction strategies for the climate plan. Air quality. Another potential significant impact is that the project would not comply with all reduction strategies of the climate plan. It's in the city charter to do that. So at the end of the day, when you combine both of these projects, how does it affect this? Now, if we don't want, as a city, to pay any attention to these kind of things, we should separate ourselves back to where we were a few years ago when we had our own city charter and we could take control of the destiny and not be tied in with goals and rules and regulations implemented by, these kinds of programs. It's either one or the other, because we as citizens, not just the east side, but the west side, has to deal with this as well. So are we serious about one thing or the other? The last thing is, I just pulled down the recent ordinance for codes that's derived from this, and my question is, and I don't know, I haven't looked at the project completely, but in the new ordinance, on the green ordinance, the green building ordinance, it says here, mandatory standards for green building compliance for non-residential projects. The following non-residential projects shall exceed Title 24 energy efficiency standards by 15% as required under new commercial buildings over 5,000 square feet, which this has, mixed-use buildings. So I just want to leave you with this one document that kind of covers everything I've talked about. But what I'd like to see happen going forward before we complete the EIR is, in fact, in your own website, from your greenhouse inventory, it's just an upcoming assessment on here. It says the city is partnering with joint venture Silicon Valley, et cetera, to, I think they're going to want to try to run another one of these inventory reports that's in your own program here. But it says here, we're talking about like next year, down the road kind of thing. What I'd like to see is it done before we make any final improvements on the EIR, so that the current greenhouse contributes to In-N-Out Burger, to include the Transit Village project, and then assess the EIR again to find out if we're meeting the goals that's in the city charter for climate protection. That all the building codes and rules, regulations are distributed from and decided on down to us and to commercial companies. Also, out of here is to verify section 15.04.125F mandatory standards, except that's what I had mentioned about the Title 24 to increase the standards by 15%. And then there's a very interesting section here in your current code that says the city of San Carlos, under geologic, it's 15.04.125A under geologic. The city of San Carlos is located in an active seismic area. The San Andreas Fault is located 3 miles from the city. The use of green building practices encourage development away from these areas and the fault zone. And you read on what it says in the next sentence. If you could say that, if you could do that with a straight face, it's interesting. So take a look at that, and the section 1, and then I'd like to see how to address the part of the EIR that just basically ignores the climate protection program within San Carlos. It's in the current Transit EIR in section 1 and 4 under air quality. And you must ask yourself, how does building another facility that's bringing thousands of more cars after what we've already brought into San Carlos from the In-N-Out Burger, is it going to lower the greenhouse emissions any? You have to really kind of weigh on your judgment. Can we produce more legal documents and permits and things that moves us down the line of green buildings and green living and lower CO2, or we just ignore it and move forward? That's all I have to say, sir.
Thank you, Brian.
I can just leave you with this.
Yeah, can you actually give that to staff so that they can answer those?
Just to point out, it's actually in the environmental report. It is significant, and there's about 10 mitigating measures to make it less than.
But I read those mitigating measures. In my mind, it doesn't really pass a smell test because it doesn't take into context what you've already built in In-N-Out Burgers. You have to look at the whole inventory. See, it's not just that Transit Village, but it's in context of what we've already done, and then where we're going in 2020 and 2030.
I understand, but we're talking about the Transit Village right now, and the reports about the Transit Village.
Yeah, but it's an environmental. These are 2 environmental impact reports. So I mean, we have environmental.
Right, but the In-N-Out Burger was not required to have an environmental impact report because it was covered under the environmental impact report for the general plan when it was done. And so the impacts were actually taken into consideration of certain types of developments within that environmental impact report. And so those were all taken into consideration prior to the transit village. And so the transit village is above and beyond that and requires its own environmental impact report, independent of all the other things.
Okay.
Okay?
That's fine, but then just consider in the ERR, it totally ignores the cap.
Yes, and that we'll let staff attempt to answer that.
It doesn't ignore the cap. We discussed that in the environmental impact report. And Commissioner Gutierrez is correct. We included a mitigation measure to bring the project 15% below the Title 24 requirements to individually mitigate for the impacts associated with the Transit Village project. But you're also correct that this project is not required to provide mitigation measures for other projects within the city of San Carlos. Those would be subject to whatever applicable environmental regulations were in place when those were approved.
Okay.
Well, all I know is that these
We have one more speaker, I think.
these inventory things were community-wide emissions and not segregated by, this program or that project, that's all.
But each one is sort of.
But how do you
dealt
capture
with
air
under
and
the-
gases?
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, well, anyway, I made my point.
They
Thank you.
have formulas for that. Thank you.
All right.
Brian.
I'm just saying. Just, he didn't say the thing about the $75,000. I made a mistake on that. I apologize. He did go straight the other way, but not. No, it's. I want to take that off the record just in case.
Okay.
I'm actually honored to know that somebody thinks I'm a good enough writer to let me go straight for them. And I also want to apologize. It seems like often I'm up here at the end of the day, and I know it's getting close to my bedtime and probably all yours, and I also realize that this was self-inflicted because I did put in a speaker card. But one of the things I've been thinking about the last couple of days that we've been here talking a little bit about parking, and I think the whole concept of the transit parking hasn't been fully addressed. And so what I thought I'd do is spend a couple of minutes here just kind of explaining to you guys a little bit about how the transit stuff works to give you some context as you think about all this. So right now in the parking lot, and I'm using the term parking lot very specifically here, in the parking lot at the Caltrain at the Caltrain station, there are 226 parking spots. But if you go out there and you look at that parking lot, it really is a parking lot. If you go out there tomorrow in the middle of the day, you'll see a bus or two staged out there. Those buses will be taking up about 10 parking spots each. There's no space for those buses. They're there. When I come out of the train every morning, when I take the train, I try to take it 3 days a week, don't always succeed, but you come out in the morning, there's a shuttle right on the red curb right to the right of the old station building. There's a shuttle bus every morning when I get off the train at 8:25 waiting to pick people up. Not a dedicated area, waiting at a red curb. There's no area for kiss and ride. So if you were to go there and you were to be dropped off by whoever you might want to kiss on your way to getting on the train, there's no place for you specifically to be dropped off. You'd use that red curb again. So basically what you have there right now is a parking lot, 226 spots packed into the area that's in. So one of the things that we tried to do when we built this development, and one of the advantages we feel for San Carlos is we're taking the area at the head of San Carlos Avenue, and we're going to convert that from an area where buses and cars and shuttles compete with pedestrians and bikes to get in and out of the station. Right now, when you cross that area, you're crossing El Camino Real, you're coming in and out where buses and trucks and everybody else is going in and out. That's going to be removed. So we are going to now be splitting traffic. We're going to be having everybody who's a pedestrian is going to be coming in at the plaza area. That's going to be a pedestrian-only plaza area, and we'll try to get a photo up here for you of that. There we go. So this area now, if you were to enter through here, you'll note that the crosswalks only go across 2 of the 3 potential areas. That whole entryway in front of the historic depot building, cars, buses, shuttles enter through that area. Part of this project will separate that. That'll be pedestrian-only zone. We're going to add another leg to the intersection. We're going to put up the markings and all that. All that's going to now come in Cherry. The other thing that you'll notice, if we go down one, and you can just see at the far right-hand corner of this slide, you can see the end of a double-stacked kiss and ride. In other words, you see those 2 cars there at the far right end. That's a double-stacked kiss and ride, meaning kiss and ride there, and then there's a little island you could come in on the other side. So in this new transit center, as opposed to a parking lot, we're going to have 226 parking spots, but we're going to have this double-stacked kiss and ride that will allow people to get dropped off as they come to the station. We're going to have bus stop areas. We're also going to have bus layover areas, again, dedicated, so they're not taking up parking spots. So when we're talking 226 spots, we're really talking 226 spots. We're talking 5 spots that will be dedicated for shuttles and buses. One of the things that I learned as a humble real estate guy and not a transit operator when we were doing this is, if you're coming in on a shuttle, you want to be able to come down off the stairway, down into the plaza waiting area and make a visual connection to that shuttle. Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to feel that last part of your commute is going to be something where you're going to have to wait for a bus or a shuttle. So we've got waiting areas where the shuttles can wait, pick up a visual cue as you come down off that ramp. The shuttle will then come up to the kiss and ride, pick you up, and drive off. So we have dedicated areas for buses, shuttles, those things. Plus we have 226 spots. Now, just in terms of some ridership numbers I think you may find interesting, I did. Caltrain does a ridership count every February, once a year. And this February, we counted the average daily ridership at the San Carlos station as 1,004 riders. We do a parking count once a month. We have a guy who goes and physically counts every month, every parking lot that we have. And the average parking for fiscal year 2012 was 67 cars. So out of 226, we had 67 average. Now, I double-checked those numbers because I wanted to get a read on what's the high and low. So between May and September of this year, our low was 59, our high was 91. So there's a fairly wide range, but the average number of parkers in those 226 spots is 67. Just by way of comparison, we got about 95 people who take their bike and access the train by their bike. So what does that mean to this project? It means there's a significant excess of parking in that transit area. It means that transit parking is going to be moved south and connected to downtown via Cherry. So it's going to give opportunities for shared use at that end. There's an area at the very south end of the parking that we are constructing that we're calling a mixed use area, I think is a term we're using in the reports. That area is unpaved. It's an area that potentially could be paved and potentially could accommodate extra parking. So while there have been some concerns focusing around the retail, I would argue that you have kind of the opposite level of concerns with regard to the transit parking. We do have some excess out there. So it's just some food for thought for you to think about as you move forward. Thank you.
I'll tell you where all the rest of those cars are. They're sitting in the neighborhood.
Great.
So that's something that has to be addressed. And getting those cars back into the Caltrain, Samtrans, I call it the Caltrain parking lot because I take Caltrain, the Samtrans parking facility will generate revenue for you. That's the whole point of all of this.
Absolutely, and I think the idea is obviously pending support through the neighborhood of residential parking programs and things of that nature for for the existing situation, irrespective of what happens in the future, I think is a very visionary idea. So I think that's, good direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
So before we sort of continue the public hearing, one last thing that I want to bring up is the email from Kara Vonk on the cultural aspect of the transit, the historic depot. And I would just like to make sure that we address this through some mechanism, some sort of comment from staff.
Come to the podium.
Please.
I will observe that she wrote a similar letter back in 2010. It's not, I don't see a heck of a lot of differences, and it's contained in the FEIR with responses to the comments that she made. So, unless there's something new in the letter.
That's correct. That was the basis of my response to that letter. It is a similar letter to what was presented for the draft document, and it's been responded to in the final.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that we address this somehow. Okay. So do I have a motion?
Well, before I make the motion, to me it sounds like we're ready at the next meeting to make a decision. So would I make the motion to continue to the 19th? Or is it the 19th?
4th.
19th?
And the only
Rather than the 4th, because that's sort of where I would be leaning.
The only thing is that we didn't really cover the other issues and concerns at the end. So the
Well, I thought
question
that we
is,
gave an opening for anyone to talk about anything that they wanted. And I also assume that folks are going to have an opportunity to have one last opportunity to talk about whatever they want at the next meeting, right?
So that's one of the directions we can go. Either we can open it back up for everybody on the 4th, or can we open it up on the 4th for one last talk, and then essentially have the commissioners talk?
My understanding, and I defer to council, is it doesn't matter whether we come on the 4th and the 19th or just on the 19th. Folks get an opportunity to talk again.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you're right.
so that's why I would suggest that, I'm willing to make a motion to continue it to the 19th.
Yeah. If the hearing is continued, then they would have the opportunity to speak at
So
to
if
the
we
date you continue the
4th,
hearing.
They'll speak on the 4th, and then they'll speak again on the 19th.
Well, it would be the 5th.
I'm sorry.
It's the 5th,
Thank
yeah.
you so much.
I'm not coming on a Sunday.
Well,
Okay.
so unless, so I'm prepared to make a
it.
motion to continue the hearing to the 19th.
It might give us more time.
Yeah.
More time on these things that we're working on, because we do want
Okay.
to have a solution.
Okay.
So that's my motion.
Have a motion?
I'll second that.
All those, we got to do a roll call vote.
Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yeah.
Commissioner Silberman,
Yes.
Commissioner Corral,
Yes.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Yes.
Chair Marsters.
Yes. Okay. We're going to move on to reports on recent city council actions, and we have about 3 minutes.
I'm willing to make a motion to
Extend it
to
15.
extend the meeting till no later than 10:45.
I'll second that.
We got to take a roll call vote again.
Roll call.
Commissioner Gutierrez,
Yes.
Commissioner Silberman,
Okay.
Commissioner Corral,
Yes.
Commissioner Harper Pedersen,
Yes.
Chair Marsters.
Yes. Okay.
All right, I'll be quick. I don't think it'll take that long.
That's Take us a little.
Just
or
to let
much
you
as
know,
long
the
as it's less than
council-
15 minutes.
Yeah, certified the Wheeler Plaza FEIR, and they've also approved a plan for the vacant storefronts at 1245 San Carlos Avenue and 616 Laurel Street. You
What
may
was that first address?
1245 San Carlos Avenue, the old furniture store. You see there's some drapes in there, and there'll be some art. And then 616 Laurel Street. And that's my report.
Planning Commission comments or reports?
Nothing from David.
Nothing from me.
Other than I met with Amy Chang last week.
Okay. Angela?
Just a reminder that I will not be there until after the election.
Thank you. And I have nothing. Correspondence?
None except what was on the dais.
Okay. Planning staff comments, reports, and updates of current projects.
You have no agenda items for November 5th, so you can expect a cancellation notice. Night off. And we do have a 2-lot annexation coming forward, which may also be on the 19th. But we're talking with the applicant about whether they want to share time or have their own time.
Because they would be at the end,
Yes,
right?
right. They would be at the
I
end.
may want to put it to a different meeting.
Okay. Meeting adjourned.